It's strange to think about now, but there was a time when crossing between continents didn't mean crossing an ocean, just land, stretching further than it does today. People moved slowly across it, not all at once, and not with any real sense of where it would lead, just following the ground as it shifted beneath their feet. This episode of Made for Sleep comes from that quieter part of history, pieced together from archaeology, migration studies, and the kind of details our team spends time sitting with, rather than rushing through. So let the rain settle in around you. And if you're still awake for a moment, you can share how you're doing and what time it is where you are. Now, let's begin. 15,000 years ago, the world looked nothing like the maps you learned in school. Sea levels sat hundreds of feet lower than they do today, and where oceans now separate continents, grass grew thick across exposed plains that stretched for hundreds of miles. What follows is a quiet walk across those vanished lands, through the slow patience of ice and time, in the company of people who didn't know they were making history. They were just walking home. You're standing on ground that doesn't exist anymore, not metaphorically, not in some poetic sense. You're standing on actual earth, solid, cold, covered in low scrub and tough grass that will be underwater in a few thousand years. Right now, though, it's just land. Flat land. A lot of it. The kind of landscape that makes you understand why the word plain sounds so plain. This is Beringia. You won't find it on any modern map because it drowned a long time ago, but for now it connects what will eventually be called Asia to what will eventually be called North America. The Bering land bridge, some will call it later, though bridge makes it sound narrow and temporary, like something you'd hesitate to cross. This isn't a bridge. This is a subcontinent. At its widest, it stretches nearly 1,000 miles from north to south. You could walk across it for weeks and never see an ocean. The sky above you sits low and grey, the kind of overcast that makes it hard to tell what time of day it is. Late morning maybe, or early afternoon. The light doesn't change much this far north, especially not in autumn. Everything exists in a sort of perpetual dimness, like the sun is always thinking about setting but never quite commits to it. Your feet press into cold soil with each step. Not frozen, it's not quite winter yet, but cold enough that you can feel it through the worn leather of your boots. The grass crunches slightly as you walk. Some of it is already yellowing at the tips, preparing for the long freeze that's coming. In a few weeks, this whole plain will be locked under snow and ice until spring. But right now, it's just cold. Manageable cold. The kind you can walk through if you keep moving. And you are moving. You've been moving for days. Weeks, actually, though you stopped counting after the first month. Time works differently out here. It stretches and compresses in strange ways. A day of walking feels both endless and instantaneous. You look back at where you've been and can still see yesterday's campsite as a tiny dark smudge on the horizon. You look forward and see tomorrow's route already laid out in gentle undulations of grass and stone. There are others with you. Maybe 15 people in your group, maybe 20. The number fluctuates. Families join for a while, then split off to follow different game trails. Cousins appear from over a ridge, travel with you for a few days, then veer south toward better fishing. Nobody makes a big deal about it. People come and go like birds following invisible currents. Right now, though, it's just your family. Your parents. You're probably in their early 40s, though they'd find that number meaningless. Your younger sister, who keeps stopping to examine interesting rocks. Your uncle, who walks 100 yards ahead and occasionally signals back about what he's seeing. And you, somewhere in your late teens or early 20s, old enough to carry your share but young enough that your knees don't ache at the end of a long day. Not yet, anyway. The landscape around you is almost aggressively plain. Grass, more grass. Occasional clusters of low shrubs, rocks that poke up through the soil like the earth is slowly exhaling stones. In the distance, very far to the west, you can make out the humped shapes of hills that might be mountains if you walk toward them for several days. You won't though, you're heading east or northeast. The direction doesn't have a name, it's just that way, toward where the reindeer tend to move in early winter. This is what most of human migration actually looked like. Not dramatic treks across dangerous territory, not desperate flights from disaster, just following food, moving when the herds move, setting up camp when you find a good spot, staying there until the resources run low or the season changes, then moving again. It's not exciting, it's not particularly heroic, it's just what you do. The wind picks up slightly, carrying the smell of distant rain. Not here yet, but coming. Maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. Hard to say. You adjust the hide draped over your shoulders and keep walking. The ground beneath your feet slopes very gently downward. You won't notice the descent until you look back in a few hours and realise how much elevation you've lost. That's how the land works out here. Everything happens gradually. The changes are so subtle that you don't see them happening. You only notice them after they've already happened. Behind you, somewhere back across hundreds of miles of grass and stone, is the place where your grandparents were born. Ahead of you, somewhere beyond the horizon, is the place where your grandchildren will live. You don't think about it in those terms. You're just walking, following the reindeer, looking for good campsites, trying to stay fed. But you are making history, very slowly, a few miles at a time. The archaeological evidence for all of this comes from scattered sites across Siberia, Alaska, and the now submerged continental shelf between them. Stone tools, fire pits, butchered bones, the remains of temporary camps that were occupied for a season or two, then abandoned as people moved on. Dating these sites is tricky. Organic material degrades, geological layers shift, and the ocean swallowed much of the most important evidence. But the picture that emerges is consistent. People were living in these northern regions by at least 15,000 years ago, probably earlier. They were hunting megafauna, mammoths, bison, wild horses. They were moving in small, flexible groups, and they were gradually, probably without realizing it, spreading east across a landscape that would eventually vanish beneath the sea. The thing is, they weren't discovering North America. That language implies intention. It suggests they knew there was a continent ahead of them and deliberately set out to find it. But that's not how it worked. Your family is just following game. If the reindeer move east, you move east. If they move west, you move west. Sometimes you encounter other families doing the same thing. Sometimes you see their old campsites, circles of stones where fires once burned, scattered bones from meals eaten weeks or months ago. Sometimes you meet them and exchange news. The fishing is good near the coast. The mammoths are moving south earlier than usual this year. There's a decent cave system about 8 days' walk to the northwest if you need to wait out a storm. Information travels slowly out here, but it does travel. Knowledge accumulates. Mental maps form. You know that if you keep going east, you'll eventually hit a range of mountains. You know that south of those mountains the terrain gets rockier. You know that certain valleys are good for late-season hunting. You don't know you're on a landmass that will eventually be called the Bering Land Bridge. You definitely don't know you're slowly walking into a continent that will eventually be called North America. You just know that the reindeer went this way, and so you're going this way too. Your sister has found another rock. She's holding it up to show your mother, who nods politely but doesn't stop walking. The rock looks like every other rock you've seen in the past 3 days, but your sister insists this one is different. It has a vein of white running through it. Your mother agrees that yes, it does have a vein of white running through it. Your sister adds the rock to her collection, which she carries in a small hide bag that's getting noticeably heavier. At some point, probably tonight when you make camp, your father will quietly suggest that maybe she doesn't need to keep every interesting rock she finds. Your sister will agree, examine her collection, remove the least interesting rocks, and then tomorrow she'll start collecting new ones. This has been the pattern for the entire journey. The sky continues its non-committal grey. The grass continues its gentle yellowing. You continue walking. After a while, an hour, maybe 2, Your uncle signals from up ahead. He's found something. Everyone speeds up slightly, not running, just walking with a bit more purpose. When you reach him, he's standing at the edge of a wide, shallow gully, where water probably runs during spring melt. Right now it's dry, and carved into the exposed soil on one side are layers of different coloured earth: dark brown, reddish clay, pale sandy soil. And jutting out from one of the middle layers, massive and unmistakable, is the curved tusk of a mammoth. Everyone stops to look at it. Your father climbs down into the gully to examine it more closely. It's old, very old. The bone is partially fossilised. This mammoth died long before any of you were born, long before your parents were born, maybe even before your grandparents. Time is hard to conceptualise in those terms. The past just is. Things happened before, and now they're done, and occasionally you find evidence of them weathering out of hillsides. Your mother wonders aloud if this is a good omen. Your father shrugs. Could be. Mammoths are valuable. Seeing a mammoth tusk, even an ancient one, might mean mammoths are nearby. Or it might mean nothing. Omens are complicated. Your uncle doesn't care about omens. He's already moved on, continuing east, and after a few minutes everyone follows. The tusk remains where it is, slowly eroding out of the soil. In another 1,000 years it'll weather free completely and fall to the bottom of the gully. In 10,000 years the entire area will be underwater. But for now, it's just a thing you saw once while walking east. You'll probably mention it tonight when you make camp. We saw an old mammoth tusk today, and then tomorrow you'll keep walking, and the tusk will fade into the general category of things we've seen, along with interesting rock formations and that weird frost pattern from last week, and the time your sister nearly stepped on a ground squirrel. The concept of the Bering Land Bridge was first seriously proposed in the early 20th century. Though indigenous peoples in the region had oral traditions about landscape changes that suggested they understood something significant had happened to the geography over deep time, the scientific evidence mounted slowly. Geologists studied sea level changes and calculated that during the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, global sea levels were perhaps 400 feet lower than today. That much water locked up in ice sheets meant that shallow areas of the ocean floor became dry land. The Bering Strait, which currently separates Asia from North America by about 55 miles of water, would have been a continuous landmass for thousands of years. Modern research has refined this picture considerably. Beringia wasn't just a narrow strip of land that people hurried across. It was a full ecosystem. Genetic studies of ancient plant material recovered from lake sediments show that the region supported grasslands and shrub tundra. Pollen analysis indicates diverse vegetation. Bone assemblages from archaeological sites demonstrate that megafauna, mammoths, horses, bison, caribou, lived and thrived here. This wasn't a barren ice bridge. It was a place where people lived. You don't know any of this historical context, of course. You're just walking through your normal world. But it's worth understanding what that world is. This isn't a temporary route between two places. This is home. Maybe not permanent home. Few places are truly permanent for people who follow migratory game, but home in the sense that it's familiar. You know these grasses. You know how to find water here. You know which animals to hunt and which to avoid. You know that in spring certain valleys fill with birds. You know that in autumn fish run up the streams in numbers that make catching them almost trivial. This is just life. Regular, ordinary life. And you're living it on ground that will be gone in a few thousand years. The sun, still hidden behind its perpetual grey blanket, begins to sink toward the horizon. The light shifts from ambiguous dimness to a more definite sort of evening. Your father starts looking for a good campsite. He's considering several factors simultaneously. Flat ground, obviously. Access to water. There's a small creek visible about half a mile to the north. Shelter from wind. Those low hills over there would work. Proximity to fuel. Driftwood is scarce out here, but there are dry shrubs and some animal dung that burns reasonably well. And though he wouldn't articulate it this way, A certain feeling about the place, a sense that it's safe, that predators don't frequent this particular spot, that the land here is neutral. You find something that meets his criteria, a slight depression in the ground near a cluster of rocks that will block the worst of the wind. Everyone stops walking without needing to be told. The routine is automatic. Your mother and sister start gathering fuel. Your uncle begins arranging rocks for a fire pit. Your father unpacks the materials needed to actually start a fire, which involves a fire drill and bow and enough patience that you're always impressed when it works. Your job is to fetch water, so you head toward the creek with several high containers. The walk to the creek is quiet. Your footsteps make soft sounds in the grass. Somewhere far off, you hear a bird calling. Not a bird you recognize. The sound is high and slightly mournful. It calls 3 times, then stops. You reach the creek, which is exactly as advertised. Narrow, shallow, cold. The water runs clear over smooth stones. You fill the containers, which takes a few minutes. The water is so cold it makes your fingers ache. You're careful not to disturb the sediment at the bottom. Murky water is drinkable, but clear water is better. On the way back, you notice how the light has changed again. It's definitely evening now. The grey has deepened. Not dark yet, but getting there. By the time you return to camp, your father has a fire going. It's small. Fuel is too precious to waste on large fires, but adequate. The flames are orange and steady. Your mother is preparing food, which tonight consists of dried fish and some root vegetables someone dug up yesterday. Not a feast, but enough. You're hungry enough that it'll taste good. Everyone set it around the fire. For a while nobody talks. You eat slowly. The fish is salty and chewy. The roots are bland but filling. The fire makes small crackling sounds. Smoke rises and dissipates into the darkening sky. Your sister has taken out her rock collection and is arranging the stones in some pattern that makes sense to her. Your uncle is checking his spear, examining the point to make sure it's still secure. Your mother and father are just sitting, tired from a day of walking. This is most of life, really. Not the exciting parts that get remembered and passed down as stories. Just this, sitting by a fire after a long day, eating food, resting, feeling the warmth on your face while the cold creeps up your back, watching smoke rise, existing. Eventually your father mentions the mammoth tusk. Your uncle makes a non-committal sound. Your mother says she thinks it means good hunting ahead. Your sister asks if mammoths have souls. Your father says he doesn't know. Probably. Most animals do. Your sister asks where the souls go when the animal dies. Your father says he doesn't know that either. Somewhere. The question doesn't seem to trouble him. There are lots of things nobody knows. The fire burns down gradually. Your father adds a few pieces of fuel, then declares that's enough for tonight. Too cold to let it die completely, but warm enough that it doesn't need much. Everyone prepares to sleep. This involves arranging hides, checking that everything is secure, making sure the fire won't spread, and then lying down on cold ground in positions that are never quite comfortable, but are familiar enough that you can sleep anyway. You lie on your back and look up at the sky. The clouds have thinned slightly. You can see a few stars, not many, just a handful of bright points in the grey-black darkness. You don't know their names. You know some patterns. Your father taught you to recognise certain arrangements that help with direction. But mostly they're just lights. Pretty, distant, indifferent. You close your eyes. The ground is hard beneath you. The fire makes small settling sounds. Someone near you is already snoring softly. The wind moves across the plain in a way that sounds almost like breathing. You're tired. Very tired. The kind of tired that comes from walking all day with a pack on your back. You sleep. Morning arrives not with sunrise but with gradual lightning. The sky shifts from black to dark grey to lighter grey. You wake when your father starts rebuilding the fire. Nobody says good morning. You just sit up, stretch, eat some leftover food from last night, and start preparing to walk again. The routine is efficient. Fire out, gear packed, a quick scan to make sure nothing is being left behind. and then you're walking again, heading east through the same type of landscape you walked through yesterday. Grass, stone, grey sky. The monotony is almost meditative. But the land is changing, though so slowly you barely notice. The grass is slightly shorter here. The soil is a bit sandier, and ahead, still distant but closer than yesterday, those mountains are becoming more defined. You can see snow on the peaks, not surprising. It's autumn, and you're far north. Snow comes early here. Over the next several days, or maybe it's a week, time blurs, you continue moving east. The weather stays cold and grey. You see a small herd of horses one afternoon far off to the south. Your uncle wants to track them, but your father thinks they're too distant to bother with. Better to keep moving. There will be other game. You pass several more old campsites. Circles of stones, scattered bones. In one place someone carved a simple design into a rock. Just lines and circles. No obvious meaning. Humans were here, and they left a mark, and now you're here looking at it. The mountains are getting closer. You're entering foothills now. The terrain is less flat, more varied. There are actual trees here, though not many. Scattered stands of stunted conifers clinging to rocky slopes. The vegetation is different too. More shrubs, less grass. The ground is rockier, which makes walking harder but also more interesting. You find yourself watching your feet more, choosing each step carefully. One afternoon, you reach a pass through the mountains. It's not dramatic. Just a natural gap where the terrain slopes gently upward, flattens out, then slopes down the other side. But standing at the top of the pass, you can see east for miles. And what you see is more land, more grass, more gentle hills rolling away toward a horizon that might as well be infinity. You're in Alaska now, though obviously you don't call it that. You don't call it anything. It's just land. More of the same land you've been walking through for weeks. But to someone looking at a map thousands of years in the future, this is significant. You've crossed from Asia into North America. You've migrated continents. You're part of one of the most important movements in human history. But right now, you're just thinking about finding a good place to camp before it gets dark. The archaeological record shows that humans reached the interior regions of Alaska by at least 14,000 years ago, possibly earlier. The evidence consists primarily of stone tools, projectile points, scrapers, blades, found at sites across the region. Some of these sites show repeated occupation, suggesting that people return to favourable locations seasonally. Other sites appear to have been used only once or twice, temporary camps, places where someone stopped for a night or two, then moved on. Dating early sites is complicated by several factors. Organic material like wood or bone degrades over time, especially in periglacial environments where freeze-thaw cycles destroy cellular structures. Sediment layers can be disturbed by natural processes, mixing older and younger materials. And the chaotic geology of previously glaciated landscapes means that stratigraphy, the layering of soil that archaeologists use to establish chronology, is often unreliable. Despite these challenges, a general picture has emerged. People were living in eastern Beringia during the late Pleistocene. They were hunting megafauna, they were making sophisticated stone tools, and they were gradually moving south and east, following game and exploring new territories. This wasn't a single migration event. It was an ongoing process that played out over thousands of years. Different groups moved at different times. Some stayed in the north, others pushed south. Population densities remained low, probably no more than a few thousand people scattered across hundreds of thousands of square miles. You camp that night on the eastern side of the pass. It's colder here. The wind has teeth. Your father manages to get a fire going, but it struggles against the breeze. Everyone huddles close. Your mother distributes more dried fish. Your sister has finally abandoned her rock collection, deeming it too heavy to carry over the mountains. She looks mildly sad about this, but pragmatic. The rocks will be fine without her. That night is harder than most. The cold is aggressive. You wake several times because your hip hurts from lying on rocky ground, or because the fire has died down and you need to feed it, or because the wind makes a sound like something crying. Nobody sleeps well. When morning finally arrives, everyone is tired and irritable. You eat quickly and start walking just to generate warmth. The next few days blur together into a sequence of cold, walking, making camp, sleeping poorly, and walking again. The landscape remains stubbornly similar. Grass, rocks, hills, occasional trees. You see more game now, caribou mostly, and once, very far off, what might be a mammoth. Your uncle gets excited about the mammoth, but it's too distant to pursue. By the time you could reach it, it would be long gone. So you watch it for a few minutes, a huge dark shape moving across a hillside, and then keep walking. Around this time, you start to notice that the land is different in subtle ways. The vegetation has changed. Different grasses, different shrubs. The rocks look different too. More volcanic stone, less limestone. The sky is still grey. You're beginning to think the sky might just be grey forever. But the quality of the greyness has shifted. It's harder to articulate. Just a feeling that you're somewhere new. Your father seems to sense it too. He's more cautious now. He scouts further ahead before committing to a direction. He checks the wind more frequently. At night, he's careful about the fire, making sure it's fully extinguished before everyone sleeps. You're in unfamiliar territory now. Not dangerous necessarily, just unknown. An unknown requires caution. You're also, though you don't realise it, moving into what will eventually be called Alaska's interior, the region between the Brooks Range to the north and the Alaska Range to the south. It's a vast landscape of boreal forest and tundra, cut through by wide rivers and dotted with thousands of lakes. 14,000 years ago it would have been colder and drier than it is today. Less forest, more grass, but still rich in game, and still home to small, scattered groups of humans who are figuring out how to live here. Genetic studies of modern indigenous populations in Alaska and northern Canada suggest that their ancestors have been in these regions for thousands of years. The genetic markers are distinct from both Asian and southern North American populations, indicating a long period of relative isolation. These populations adapted to their environment over millennia, developing specialized knowledge about local ecology, sophisticated hunting strategies, and cultural practices suited to life in the far north. You don't think about any of this in genetic terms, obviously, but you are aware that your family has knowledge. Your father knows how to track caribou across different types of terrain. Your mother knows which plants are edible and which will make you sick. Your uncle knows how to read the weather by watching the sky and feeling the wind. Your sister is learning all of this slowly, by watching and listening and occasionally asking questions. Knowledge accumulates. It's passed down, not through writing. You don't have writing, but through demonstration and practice and story. One morning your father wakes everyone earlier than usual. He's found something. Everyone gets up quickly, curious. He leads you about half a mile north to where a stream cuts through a rocky hillside, and there, weathering out of the stream bank, are bones. Many bones. All from the same animal, judging by their size and proximity. Your father thinks it's a bison, a large one, and the bones aren't ancient. They're maybe a year or two old, still relatively fresh, which means this is good hunting territory. Your uncle examines the bones carefully. He agrees with your father's assessment. This area has game, the stream has water, the hills provide some shelter. This is a good place to stay for a while, so you stop walking. Stopping doesn't mean sitting still. It means establishing a more permanent camp. Your family finds a good location, a south-facing slope where the sun, when it occasionally appears, provides some warmth. There's an overhang of rock that creates a natural shelter. The stream is close. Firewood is available. Over the next several days, everyone works to make the camp more comfortable. Your father and uncle construct a windbreak using branches and hides. Your mother sets up a dedicated area for food preparation. Your sister, freed from the tyranny of daily walking, immediately resumes collecting rocks. This camp will be home for the next few weeks, maybe months. It depends on the game. If hunting stays good, you'll stay. If the herds move on, you'll follow. But for now, this is it. Your small piece of the world. Life in a more permanent camp has a different rhythm than life on the move. There's time for maintenance. Your father spends several days working on tools, resharpening blades, replacing broken hafts. Your mother processes hides, scraping them clean and working them until they're supple. Your uncle goes out hunting every few days and returns with caribou or smaller game. You help with everything, fetching water, gathering fuel, assisting with butchering and food preparation. The weather turns properly cold. Snow begins to fall, not constantly, just occasional flurries that dust the ground white and then melt away. But the message is clear. Winter is coming. Your family prepares. More hides are processed. More food is dried and stored. The windbreak is reinforced. Everyone accepts that the next few months will be hard. That's just what winter is. One night, sitting by the fire, your father tells a story. Not a new story. You've heard it before. But stories get repeated, and that's how they're remembered. It's about a hunter who tracked a great elk for 7 days across mountains and valleys. The elk was clever. It doubled back on its trail, crossed streams to hide its scent, and travelled through terrain where following was almost impossible. But the hunter was patient. He didn't rush. He just kept following, and eventually, after 7 days, the elk grew tired. It stopped in a valley and rested, and the hunter caught up to it and made his kill. The story is about patience, about persistence, about understanding that success doesn't come from speed or force, but from simply not giving up. Your father doesn't explain this. The story explains itself. Everyone listens. The fire crackles. Outside the shelter, snow is beginning to fall again. You think about the story later, after the fire has burned down and everyone is asleep. You think about patience, about how your family has been walking for months, not really toward anything specific, just following game and good weather, and a sense that east is better than west. How you've covered hundreds of miles without ever hurrying. How you're now camped in a place that might as well be nowhere, or might as well be everywhere, depending on how you think about it. Tomorrow your uncle will go hunting again. Your father will continue working on tools. Your mother will check the food supplies. Your sister will add rocks to her collection. Life will continue in its slow, steady way. And somewhere far to the south, distances so vast you can't comprehend them, other families are doing the same thing, walking, hunting, setting up camps, surviving. None of you know that you're part of something larger, that these small movements, multiplied across thousands of families over thousands of years, will result in 2 entire continents being populated, that your descendants will build cities and civilizations, that archaeologists will dig up your campsites and try to piece together what your life was like. You're just living, following the game, trying to stay warm, looking at stars on clear nights and wondering what they are. That's enough. Winter settles in properly. The snow doesn't melt anymore. It accumulates. The landscape transforms into white and grey. The mountains in the distance become indistinct, just pale shapes against a pale sky. The stream freezes, though your father knows where to chop through the ice to reach water underneath. Game becomes harder to find. The caribou have moved to lower elevations. The smaller animals have burrowed into the ground or migrated elsewhere. Your family survives on stored food and occasional hunting success. Your uncle manages to bring down a caribou one afternoon. Pure luck, he insists, though everyone knows he's being modest. The caribou wandered close to camp, and he was ready. The meat will last for weeks if it's rationed carefully. Everyone thanks him in quiet, matter-of-fact ways. Good work. We needed that. He accepts the thanks with a shrug. The days are short now. Light arrives late and leaves early. Most of your time is spent in the shelter, huddled around the fire trying to stay warm. Boredom becomes a factor. There's only so much tool maintenance you can do, only so many hides to process. Your sister has exhausted the local supply of interesting rocks. Your mother tells stories to pass the time. Your father carves small figures from wood, animals mostly. He's not particularly skilled at it, but it gives his hands something to do. You think about time a lot during winter, how it moves so slowly when you're cold and bored, how a day feels like a week, how weeks blur together because every day is the same. Grey light, cold, hunger that is not quite starvation, but is always present, waiting for spring. But winter doesn't last forever. Eventually, imperceptibly at first, the days start getting longer. The snow begins to thin. The temperature rises just enough that your breath doesn't fog quite as dramatically. And one morning you hear a bird, just one, a high, chirping call. It's the first bird sound you've heard in months. Everyone stops to listen. Your mother smiles. Spring is coming. Over the next several weeks, the transformation accelerates. More birds arrive. The stream thaws. Patches of brown earth appear through the snow, and the game returns. First in small groups, then in larger herds. Caribou moving north, bison grazing on the exposed grass. Your uncle goes hunting and returns successful more often than not. Food becomes abundant again. Your family starts preparing to move. The camp has served its purpose. You survived winter. Now it's time to follow the herds again. The shelter is dismantled carefully. Useful materials are packed. Perishable items are left behind. The fire is extinguished completely. After a few hours of work, it's as if you were never there. Just a flattened area of ground and some scattered rocks. In a few years, even those signs will fade. You resume walking. East and slightly south this time, following a river valley that cuts through the landscape. The walking feels easier after months of sitting still. Your body remembers the rhythm. Your legs remember the distance. The pack on your back, which felt unbearably heavy that first day, now just feels normal. The land continues changing. More trees now. Actual forests in some places. The rivers are wider. The valleys deeper. You're moving into interior Alaska, though you don't know that's what it's called. You just know the terrain is different, richer somehow, more varied, more alive. One afternoon you see smoke in the distance, just a thin column rising above the trees. Your father signals everyone to stop. Smoke means fire, fire means people, and people can be friendly or unfriendly. Your father decides to investigate, but cautiously. Your family approaches slowly, making noise so the other group knows you're coming. Surprising people is rude at best and dangerous at worst. The other group turns out to be friendly. Another family, roughly the same size as yours. They speak a language that's similar enough to yours that basic communication works. You're from the west, they're from the south. Everyone exchanges information. The hunting is good along this river. There's a good crossing point about 2 days east. A large herd of bison was spotted a week ago heading northeast. You camp together that night. The two fires merge into one. Food is shared. Your sister compares rocks with one of their children. The adults trade stories and information. You learn that these people have been in this region for several generations. Their grandparents walked here from somewhere far to the south. They know the land well. They tell your father about good hunting grounds and places to avoid. In the morning, the two groups part ways, friendly but not particularly sentimental about it. You'll probably never see these people again. That's just how it works. You exchange goodbyes and good wishes and head in different directions, but information has been exchanged. Your mental map has expanded. You now know things about the region ahead that you didn't know yesterday. This is how knowledge spreads. Slowly. Through chance meetings and shared stories. No books, no maps. Just people talking to each other by firelight and remembering what they're told. Over the following months, your family continues moving through interior Alaska. The landscape varies. Sometimes dense forest, sometimes open tundra, sometimes rocky highlands, sometimes river valleys thick with vegetation. The weather remains unpredictable. Cold mornings and warm afternoons, sudden rain, occasional snow, even in summer. You adapt. You always adapt. You see more people now, not frequently, but occasionally. other families following game, small groups camped by good fishing spots. Once, a very large gathering, maybe 50 people, all assembled near a river where salmon are running in huge numbers. Your family joins them for a few days. The fishing is absurdly good. You catch more fish than you can eat. Everyone does. The excess is dried and smoked for later. The gathering is temporary. Once the salmon run ends, people disperse. But during those few days, there's a sense of community. Stories are shared. Knowledge is exchanged. Young people look at each other with interest. Relationships form. Not everyone is family, but there's a sense that everyone is connected in some broader way. The same people, the same challenges, the same understanding of how to live in this landscape. You leave the gathering with more food than you arrived with, plus information about the region to the south, which several people recommend as good winter territory. Your family considers this information. Winter is still months away, but it's worth thinking about. The archaeological evidence for this period, roughly 13 to 12,000 years ago, shows increased population density in interior Alaska. More sites, more widespread distribution. Genetic data suggest that populations were growing and diversifying. Different groups were developing distinct cultural practices and technologies adapted to their specific environments. But none of this would have been obvious to you at the time. You're just living your life, following game, meeting people occasionally, moving through seasons. The idea that you're part of some larger demographic trend would be incomprehensible. You're just you. Your family is just your family, and the world is just the world. One day, late in summer, you reach a high point in the landscape, a ridge that overlooks a vast valley stretching out below. The valley is green and lush. A wide river meanders through it. Forests cluster along the riverbanks. In the distance, more mountains rise against the horizon. Your father stands looking at the valley for a long time. Your mother joins him. They don't say much, just look. Eventually your father says that this seems like a good place. Your mother agrees. Your uncle nods. Your sister's already scrambling down the ridge, excited to explore new territory. You follow. The descent takes several hours. By the time you reach the valley floor, the sun is setting. The light turns golden. The river reflects the sky. Everything feels peaceful, abundant, safe. You make camp near the river. The ground is soft, the grass is thick. The sound of water moving over rocks is soothing. Your father gets a fire going easily. Plenty of dry wood here. Your mother prepares food. Your uncle scouts the immediate area and reports that game trails are everywhere. This is good territory. That night, lying by the fire, you think about all the places you've been. The wide plains of Beringia, the mountain passes, the cold camps where you survived winter, the river valleys, the forests, all those miles, all those days of walking. And now you're here, in a place that feels for the moment like it could be home. Not permanent home, probably. Your family will move again when the seasons change or the game moves on. But for now, this is it. This valley, this river, this sky full of stars that you still don't know the names of. Far to the west, back across hundreds of miles, the land you walked across is slowly changing. Sea levels are rising. Beringia is shrinking. The land bridge that connected Asia to North America is growing narrower. In another 1,000 years it will be gone entirely, drowned beneath the Bering Strait. But you don't know that. You don't know that the route you walked is closing behind you, that future generations won't be able to follow the same path. You just know that you're here, in this valley, in this moment, with your family, and that's enough. The fire burns low, the stars wheel overhead, the river makes its endless sound. You close your eyes and sleep, dreamless and deep, the sleep of someone who walked a very long way and finally stopped moving. Years pass, seasons cycle. Your family stays in the valley for longer than usual. The hunting remains good. The river provides fish. The forest provides fuel and shelter. It's as close to permanent as anything in your life has been. Your sister, no longer so young, starts her own family. Children are born. Your parents grow older. The lines in their faces deepen. Their hair greys. Your uncle's knees start bothering him on cold mornings. Everyone adapts to these changes without much comment. This is life. People age. Families grow. The world continues turning. You're older now too. Middle-aged, if that's a term that would mean anything to you. You have your own children. You teach them the things your father taught you. How to track game. How to read the weather. How to make fire and tools and shelter. How to be patient. How to keep walking when walking is all that's left. One autumn, your family decides to move south. The winters here are getting harder, or maybe your parents are just getting older and feel the cold more acutely. Either way, south seems better, warmer, easier, so you walk again. Not as far this time, not as fast. Your parents can't manage the long days of walking they once could. You take it slowly, rest often, make camp earlier. The journey that might have taken 2 weeks in your youth takes nearly 2 months. But you make it. You reach a region of foothills where the climate is milder and the winters less brutal. You make a new camp, another valley, another river, different but similar. The pattern repeats because the pattern works. Your father dies that winter, not dramatically, just old age. He goes to sleep one night and doesn't wake up. Your mother grieves quietly. Your uncle helps dig the burial. Your sister sings something soft and wordless. You feel the loss, but not as a shock. He was old. This was always going to happen. That doesn't make it easier, but it makes it understandable. Spring comes again. Life continues. Your children are growing. They're starting to push for more independence, wanting to explore, wanting to know what's beyond the next ridge. You recognize the impulse. You felt it too once. You tell them what your father told you. Be patient, be careful, pay attention to the land. It'll teach you what you need to know. Some of them listen, some don't. That's also part of life. The archaeological record for this period becomes richer. More sites, more artifacts, better preservation. Researchers have found evidence of camps scattered across Western Canada and the northern United States dating to around 12,000 years ago. These sites show increasing sophistication in tool technology. The famous Clovis points, distinctive spear points with fluted bases, appear in the record. Other stone tool traditions emerge and spread. Bone tools become more common. Art objects appear, though rarely. The genetic evidence becomes interesting here too. Studies of modern indigenous populations show that most people in the Americas trace their primary ancestry to populations that entered the continent during this period. There are some complexities, later waves of migration, regional adaptations, genetic drift, but the basic picture holds. The people walking through Alaska and northwestern Canada 12,000 years ago were the ancestors of hundreds of millions of people living today. You don't know this. You can't. You don't even know that you have descendants in any meaningful way. You know you have children, and they'll probably have children, but the idea that your bloodline will spread across 2 continents and persist for hundreds of generations is literally unimaginable. You're just living, trying to stay fed, trying to stay warm, teaching your children what you know. One day, decades after you first arrived in this region, you climb to a high point overlooking your valley. It's a clear day. Rare. The sky is actually blue instead of grey. You can see for miles. Mountains in every direction. Forests, rivers. The land stretches out impossibly vast and impossibly empty. But you know it's not empty. There are people out there. Small groups. Scattered families. All doing the same thing you're doing. Surviving, adapting, learning. Moving slowly through the landscape. You've met some of them, exchanged stories, shared fires, and you know there are many more you'll never meet. You think about your father, about all those miles you walked together, about sitting by fires and listening to his stories, about learning to track and hunt and survive. He's gone now, but what he taught you isn't. You're teaching it to your children. They'll teach it to theirs. Knowledge persists. You think about the land too, how much of it there is, how little you've seen despite walking for most of your life, how there's always more beyond the next ridge, always more valleys, more rivers, more mountains. The land doesn't end, it just keeps going. You stay on the ridge for a while. The sun moves across the sky, the light shifts. Eventually you head back down to camp. Your family is there. Your mother, now very old, sitting by the fire. Your sister cooking something. Your children playing. Your grandchildren watching everything with wide, curious eyes. This is life. This moment. This place. You don't need it to mean anything more than that. The story could end here, with you on that ridge, with your family in the valley below, with the understanding that life continues generation after generation in these quiet, steady rhythms. But the land has its own story, and that story is about loss. Far to the northwest, Beringia is drowning. The glaciers that locked up so much water during the Ice Age are melting, slowly at first, then faster. Sea levels rise. The land bridge that connected Asia to North America grows narrower. Rivers flood. Coastlines retreat inland. Entire ecosystems shift. The people living in Beringia notice these changes over generations. The shore is closer than grandparents remember. The islands that used to be connected are now separated by water. The hunting grounds near the coast are gone, reclaimed by the sea. Some families move inland, following the land as it retreats. Others adapt to coastal living, becoming experts at fishing and sea mammal hunting. But the land itself, the broad grassy plains where mammoths roamed and caribou migrated, is disappearing. By 10,000 years ago, Beringia is mostly gone. Only the highest elevations remain above water. What was once a vast landmass stretching hundreds of miles has been reduced to a narrow strait between two continents. The connection is severed. The route is closed. The people who used that route don't know they were the last ones. How could they? They were just living their lives, following game, raising families, moving through the landscape the way their ancestors had for thousands of years. And then, without anyone declaring it or marking the moment, the possibility ended. The modern Bering Strait is about 55 miles wide. The water is cold and dangerous. The currents are treacherous. It's possible to cross. People have done it, both in historical times and prehistorically using boats. But it's not easy. It's not the kind of thing you can do by accident while following caribou. The drowned landscape of Beringia remains on the ocean floor. Sediment cores pulled from the seafloor contain pollen and plant material from grasslands that thrived 15,000 years ago. Underwater surveys have identified features that suggest human activity, though confirming this is difficult given the depth and conditions. Future technology might allow archaeological exploration of these submerged landscapes. For now, they remain mostly inaccessible, a lost world. You don't witness any of this. You're long dead by the time Beringia finally drowns, but your descendants live through it. They watch the coastline change. They tell stories about land that used to exist but doesn't anymore, and eventually those stories fade. The land is forgotten. It becomes legend, then myth, then nothing. Just water where there used to be ground. But the journey doesn't stop. People keep moving. Your descendants spread south and east. Some follow river valleys down into what will become Canada and the United States. Others move along coastal routes. Some stay in the far north, adapting to Arctic conditions. Populations diversify. Languages develop. Different groups develop different technologies, different cultures, different ways of understanding the world. By 9,000 years ago, people have reached the southern tip of South America. An entire hemisphere has been populated. Thousands of miles, hundreds of generations, all descending from those small groups who walked across Beringia when it was still dry land. None of them know they're connected. The family living in Patagonia has no idea they share ancestors with the family living in Alaska. Too much time, too much distance. But the genetic evidence shows the relationship clearly. They're family, very distant family. but family nonetheless. The land remembers in its way. Archaeological sites scattered across 2 continents mark where people stopped, rested, lived, and moved on. Stone tools buried in ancient sediment, fire pits filled with charcoal, bones from butchered animals, human remains occasionally reverently buried with care. All of it evidence of lives lived quietly, of families surviving, of people doing the best they could with what they had. None of it was heroic in the traditional sense. No one was conquering anything. No one was on a grand adventure. They were just living, following food, staying warm, teaching their children, walking when walking made sense and stopping when it didn't. But cumulatively it was enormous. It was the peopling of 2 continents. It was one of the largest migrations in human history. And it happened so slowly, so gradually, that no one involved would have recognised it as history at all. Just life. Regular, ordinary, difficult, beautiful life. The valley where you lived is still there. The river still runs through it. The mountains still rise against the horizon. The grass still grows thick in summer and dies back in winter. But you're not there anymore. Your family moved on or died out, or merged with other families until the specific line that was you became diluted into the broader population. Your tools, if they survived, are buried now, under soil and vegetation and time. Maybe an archaeologist will find them someday. Maybe not. It doesn't particularly matter. They were tools. You made them. You used them. They served their purpose. Your children's children's children spread across the land. Some became farmers eventually in regions where farming made sense. Others remained hunters and fishers. Some built large communities and complex societies. Others stayed in small mobile groups, all valid, all different ways of being human. The land that drowned remains drowned. Beringia is gone. The route is closed. But the memory persists in strange ways, in genetic markers, in archaeological evidence, in stories that survived in oral tradition for thousands of years before finally being written down. Modern researchers study these migrations with sophisticated tools: genetic analysis, computer modelling, linguistic reconstruction, archaeological survey. They build complex narratives about population movements and adaptation and cultural change, all of it based on fragments, broken tools, scattered bones, pollen trapped in lake sediments. They try to understand what it was like, what you experienced, how it felt to walk across Beringia, to survive winters in interior Alaska, to raise children in valleys that now bear names you never knew. They do their best. They're careful. They acknowledge uncertainty. They revise their theories when new evidence emerges, but they can never fully capture it, because it wasn't a grand narrative. It wasn't a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It was just life. Thousands of people living thousands of small lives, making thousands of small decisions, trying to find food, trying to stay safe, trying to understand the world around them. And somehow, cumulatively, changing everything. The night is deep now. Wherever you are, reading this, listening to this, the world outside has grown quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes late, when most people are asleep and the day's noise has finally faded. Think about that valley again, the one where you made camp after walking for months, the river reflecting stars, the grass moving in a wind that travelled across miles of empty land before reaching you, the fire burning low, your family sleeping nearby. Think about the patience it took to live that life, to walk for weeks without knowing exactly where you were going, to survive winters that seemed endless, to keep moving when moving was hard, to teach your children skills they'd need decades in the future, to trust that tomorrow would come and that you'd figure out how to survive it when it did. Think about the land that's gone now, the grasslands that stretched between continents, the mammoths that no longer exist, the routes that closed, the possibilities that ended, all of it swallowed by rising water and time. But think about what persists too, the genetic legacy, the archaeological evidence, the descendants who filled 2 continents, the knowledge that was passed down, generation after generation, until it became the foundation of hundreds of different cultures. You were there, in this thought experiment, this gentle fiction. You walked those miles, you felt that cold, you sat by those fires, and now you're here, safe, warm, lying down, breathing slowly, letting the story fade into the background as sleep creeps closer. The land is still there, changed, but there. The rivers still flow, the mountains still stand, the grass still grows in summer, and people still walk across these landscapes, though now they have maps and roads and names for everything. But the fundamental experience remains the same, putting one foot in front of the other, moving through space and time, looking at horizons, wondering what's beyond the next ridge, trying to understand your place in the vastness. That hasn't changed. Not really. Beringia is gone. The route is closed. The land bridge is underwater. But the journey continues, in different forms, in different ways. People still move, still adapt, still teach their children, still look at stars and wonder. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the story doesn't need a dramatic ending. Maybe it just needs to acknowledge that life continues, that people persist, that the world keeps turning, and we keep walking through it, trying to figure it out as we go. The fire burns down to coals, the stars wheel overhead, the wind moves across the grass in its endless way, and somewhere, far away, the ocean laps against shores that used to be land, covering history, hiding evidence, but not erasing what happened. You were there, you walked that path, and now you're here, tired, ready to rest, the journey complete, at least for tonight. Sleep comes slowly, gently, like water rising, like snow falling, like time passing. The land remembers, you remember, and that's enough. Rest now. The walking is done. The story is told. Everything that needed to be said has been said. The grass is still growing somewhere. The rivers are still flowing. The land continues its slow changes, indifferent and eternal, and you're safe here, far from that cold, far from that distance, just here, just now, just breathing, sleep, or just. The glaciers of Northern Europe and North America have been retreating for decades, exposing landscapes that haven't seen daylight in millennia. With each passing season, more ground emerges from beneath the ice, and with it, traces of human presence that challenge our understanding of how and where people lived in the past. This is a story about what happens when frozen time begins to thaw. You're walking across a snowfield in southern Norway, following a researcher who knows this landscape the way some people know the rooms of their childhood home. The year is recent, close enough to now that the equipment you're carrying is recognisable, the methods familiar. But the discoveries being made here belong to a different time entirely, to periods when the climate was different, when these mountains were passable in summer, when people moved through valleys that would later be sealed under ice for centuries. The researcher stops and crouches down near a patch of exposed ground where the snow has melted away. She's looking at something dark against the pale rock and dirt. At first, you can't tell what it is. Just a shape, organic and irregular, half embedded in the soil. She doesn't touch it. That's the first rule of glacial archaeology, the discipline that's emerged over the past few decades, as the ice has retreated and revealed what it's been hiding. Look, observe, photograph, document position. Don't disturb anything until you understand what you're seeing and what it might mean. You move closer, carefully, trying not to step on anything that might be significant. The object resolves itself as you approach. It's fabric, or what used to be fabric. Dark, waterlogged, partially decomposed but still recognisably textile. Woven material, the individual threads still visible despite centuries of exposure to moisture and cold. The researcher takes out her camera and begins photographing from multiple angles. She's documenting the find in situ, recording its exact position, its orientation, its relationship to the surrounding terrain. Later, these photographs will be part of the official record, evidence that will be studied by other researchers, referenced in papers, used to build understanding of what this place was and who used it. This happens more often than you might think. Since the late 1990s, when warming temperatures began accelerating the retreat of alpine glaciers and ice patches, archaeologists in Norway, Switzerland, Austria, Canada and Alaska have been finding artifacts emerging from the ice, not occasionally, regularly, sometimes dozens of objects in a single season, spanning thousands of years of human activity. The finds range from the mundane to the extraordinary. Shoes, thousands of years old, still recognisable as shoes. Arrows with intact shafts and fletching so well preserved that you can see the binding patterns, the workmanship, the individual choices made by whoever crafted them. Textiles, tools, even organic remains like horse dung and reindeer antlers, all emerging from the ice in conditions that allow for detailed analysis. What makes these discoveries significant isn't just their age or their preservation, it's what they reveal about human movement and adaptation. These artifacts are being found at high elevations, in mountain passes and on ice patches that are frozen for most of the year even now. The presence of human artifacts in these locations means people were travelling through high mountain terrain, probably seasonally, using routes that would later become impassable as the climate cooled and the ice expanded. The researcher carefully measures the distance from the textile fragment to several fixed reference points. Large boulders, distinctive rock formations, anything that will allow the exact location to be reconstructed later. She's using a handheld GPS unit to record coordinates, accurate to within a few meters. The measurements go into a field notebook, written clearly in waterproof ink. You ask her how old she thinks the textile might be. She doesn't answer immediately. That's not evasiveness, just caution. Dating requires laboratory analysis, usually radiocarbon dating of organic material, and even then the results come with margins of error. But based on the style of weaving visible in the fragment, based on similar finds from this region, she estimates it could be anywhere from 800 to 2,000 years old. Think about that range. 800 to 2,000 years. That's the span from the Viking Age to the Late Bronze Age, from a period of written records and established kingdoms to a time when writing was rare in this part of the world, and history was preserved through oral tradition. And somewhere in that span, someone walked through this mountain pass wearing or carrying this textile. Maybe it was part of their clothing. Maybe it was a bag or a bundle wrapping. Maybe it was dropped accidentally, or discarded because it was damaged, or left behind when someone died in the mountains and their companions could only carry so much back down. Whatever the circumstances, the textile ended up here, on this patch of ground, where it was gradually covered by snow that compressed into ice. And there it stayed, frozen and protected, while centuries passed, while the climate shifted, while the ice expanded and contracted in response to changes in temperature and precipitation that operated on timescales much longer than human lifespans. The researcher finishes her documentation and carefully collects the textile fragment, placing it in a sterile bag labelled with the location, date, and a unique identification number. The bag goes into a cooler, where it will stay cold until it can be transported to a laboratory for analysis. Temperature control is critical. These artifacts have been frozen for centuries. Allowing them to warm up and dry out too quickly can cause damage, can destroy the very features that make them valuable for research. You continue walking, scanning the ground as you go. The researcher explains that this is how most glacial archaeology happens, not through systematic excavation, but through reconnaissance, through regular monitoring of areas where the ice is retreating, looking for artifacts that are being exposed naturally as the snow melts. It's a race against time. Once an artifact emerges from the ice, it begins to deteriorate. Exposure to sunlight, to oxygen, to fluctuating temperatures, all of these accelerate decay. Organic materials like wood, leather, and textile can survive for thousands of years frozen in ice. But once they thaw, they can decompose in a matter of seasons. Some artifacts that emerge one summer are nothing but fragments by the next. This has created new urgency in archaeology. Glacial archaeologists now spend their summers monitoring ice patches and glacier edges, returning to the same locations year after year, checking for new finds. It's physically demanding work. The sites are at high elevations, often requiring hours of hiking to reach. The weather is unpredictable. The working season is short, limited to the brief window when the snow has melted enough to expose artifacts, but hasn't yet refrozen for winter. But the results have been remarkable. In Norway alone, the Glacier Archaeology Programme has recovered thousands of artifacts from melting ice, including some that have fundamentally changed understanding of how people used mountain landscapes in the past. You reach another area of exposed ground, this one larger, maybe 20 meters across. The snow has retreated from a slight depression in the terrain, creating a bowl-shaped area where meltwater has collected and then drained away, leaving behind a surface of gravel and mud. The researcher slows down, moving more carefully now. This kind of terrain, a natural trap where snow accumulates and melts repeatedly, is exactly where artifacts tend to appear. Objects that were lost or discarded on the ice would have been covered by subsequent snowfalls, but as the ice melts, they become concentrated in low spots like this one. She spots something almost immediately, a piece of wood, about as long as your forearm, partially embedded in the gravel. You can see even from a distance that it's been worked, that it's not just a natural stick. One end is carved to a point. The other end shows tool marks where it was shaped and smoothed. The researcher crouches beside it, begins her documentation process again. Photographs from multiple angles, GPS coordinates, measurements, notes about the exact position and condition. All of this before anyone touches the object. While she works, she explains that this is probably part of an arrow. Based on the size and shape, based on comparison with other finds from Norwegian ice patches, it's likely a main shaft section. The central part of an arrow that would have had a separate foreshaft at the tip where the arrowhead was attached, and fletching at the back for stability in flight. This kind of composite arrow construction was common across northern Europe and parts of North America for thousands of years. Different woods were selected for different parts of the arrow based on their properties. The main shaft might be pine or birch, relatively straight-grained and easy to work. The foreshaft, which had to withstand the impact of hitting the target, might be made from denser wood like dogwood or viburnum. The components were fitted together with bindings made from sinew or plant fibre, creating an arrow that was both effective and repairable. What's remarkable is that examples of these composite arrows, complete with their bindings intact, have been recovered from Norwegian ice. Not reconstructions or guesses based on archaeological evidence, but actual arrows, thousands of years old, that show exactly how they were made, what materials were used, how the components were fitted together. The researcher carefully extracts the shaft section from the gravel. It's surprisingly solid despite its age, the wood still firm, the tool mark still sharp and clear. She places it in a padded container, labels it, adds it to the growing collection of finds from this season. You ask her why people were up here in the first place. Why travel through high mountain passes when lower routes would have been easier, safer, more predictable? The answer is complex, she says, and still being researched. But the evidence suggests several possibilities. Hunting was certainly one reason. Reindeer and other game animals use ice patches in summer to escape heat and insects. Hunters following these animals would have travelled to high elevations, would have lost or discarded equipment in the snow. Many of the artefacts found in Norwegian ice are hunting related. Arrows, spears, walking sticks, remains of wooden structures that might have been hunting blinds. But there's also evidence of travel, of people crossing mountain passes to move between valleys. Some of the finds include items that wouldn't be necessary for hunting. Textiles, tools for domestic tasks, objects that suggest people were travelling for trade or seasonal migration rather than just pursuing game. The distribution of artefacts supports this interpretation. They're not randomly scattered but concentrated along specific routes. Routes that follow natural corridors through the mountains. Routes that would make sense for someone trying to get from one valley to another with minimum elevation gain and maximum efficiency. These weren't modern hiking trails with markers and maintained paths. They were routes learned through experience, passed down through generations, known to people who travelled them regularly and understood the terrain, the weather patterns, the seasonal windows when passage was possible. And then the climate changed. Not suddenly. Climate never changes suddenly on human timescales. But gradually, over decades and centuries, the temperatures dropped, the snow accumulated, the ice patches expanded. Routes that had been passable in summer became increasingly difficult, then dangerous, then impossible. The high mountain passes closed, sealed under permanent snow and ice. The people who had used these routes adapted. They found other paths, lower elevations, longer routes that avoided the mountains. The high passes were abandoned, not all at once, but gradually, as each generation found them a little more difficult, a little less reliable, until eventually they stopped being used at all. And the artefacts that had been left behind, the lost arrows, the discarded tools, the occasional unfortunate traveller who died in the mountains, were covered by snow, preserved in ice, removed from the flow of time, until now. Until the climate shifted again, temperatures rose, and the ice began its retreat. Now those artefacts are emerging, appearing on the surface after centuries of frozen darkness, still recognisable, still interpretable, still able to tell their stories if someone knows how to read them. You continue across the exposed ground, moving slowly, scanning constantly. The researcher explains that many finds are discovered entirely by chance. Someone hiking across a snowfield spots something dark against the white, investigates, realises it's not a rock or piece of vegetation but an artefact. But there's also systematic monitoring now. Researchers return to known sites year after year, documenting how the ice edge is changing, where new ground is being exposed, what artefacts are appearing. Some programs use remote sensing, satellite imagery, aerial photography to identify areas where rapid melting is occurring, areas that should be prioritised for ground surveys. It's a global phenomenon. While Norway has been particularly successful with its glacier archaeology program, similar work is happening wherever glaciers and ice patches are retreating. In the Yukon, researchers have found entire hunting camps emerging from ice patches, complete with tools, weapons, and the remains of animals that were hunted and butchered on site. In the Alps, hikers regularly discover artefacts from everything from Neolithic travellers to Roman-era soldiers to medieval traders. Each find adds to the picture, fills in gaps in understanding about how people lived, moved, and adapted to changing conditions. But each find is also a reminder of what's being lost. For every artefact that's discovered and documented, there are probably dozens that emerge, decompose, and disappear before anyone sees them. The ice is revealing its secrets faster than archaeologists can document them. The researcher checks her watch. It's getting late, the sun starting its long, slow descent toward the horizon. Time to start heading back to base camp. But first, she wants to check one more area, a spot where she found fragments last year, where the continued melting might have exposed more. You follow her across the uneven ground, stepping carefully over rocks and patches of old snow. The landscape up here has a particular quality, not desolate exactly, but spare, stripped down to essentials. Rock, snow, water, the occasional patch of hardy vegetation clinging to sheltered spots. Everything else is just space and light, and the clean mineral smell of melting ice. The spot she's looking for is marked on her GPS, but when you reach it, there's nothing obvious to see. Just more exposed ground, more gravel and mud, more patches of old snow slowly sublimating in the thin mountain air. But she's patient, methodical. She walks a grid pattern, covering the area systematically, looking at every patch of exposed ground, every dark spot, every irregularity that might be something other than rock. And then she stops, crouches down, calls you over. It's bone. Not large, maybe 10 centimetres long, but definitely bone, not wood or stone. It's been exposed recently, probably within the past few days, based on how it's positioned and the lack of weathering on the exposed surface. The researcher photographs it, documents it, but doesn't collect it immediately. Bone requires different handling than wood or textile. It's less fragile in some ways, more fragile in others. And the presence of bone raises questions about what else might be nearby. If this is from an animal that died here, there might be more remains, might be evidence of how and why the animal died, whether it was hunted or died naturally, whether humans were involved. She marks the location with a small flag, just a piece of bright orange plastic on a wire stake, and makes detailed notes about the exact position. This will require a more thorough investigation, probably a team with expertise in faunal remains and taphonomy in understanding how bones are preserved and what they can reveal about the circumstances of death and deposition. The sun is definitely lower now, the light turning golden, the shadows lengthening across the snowfield. Time to head back. The researcher takes a few final photographs, recording the overall scene, the context, the way the light falls across the landscape. You start the hike back to base camp following the route you took on the way up. The descent is easier physically but requires just as much attention. The ground is uneven, the rocks loose, the patches of old snow slippery and unpredictable. As you walk, the researcher talks about the challenges of glacial archaeology. The physical demands are obvious. The hiking, the altitude, the weather, the short season. But there are also intellectual challenges, interpretive challenges. The artifacts emerging from the ice are a biased sample. They represent only what was lost or discarded, only what happened to be in places where it got covered by snow and ice, only what's being revealed in the specific areas where melting is occurring. There's no way to know what's not being found. No way to know what artifacts were lost in areas that didn't get covered by ice, that were exposed to weathering and decomposition, that vanished without a trace. No way to know what's still buried under ice that hasn't melted yet, or what's been carried downslope by glacial movement and deposited in locations where no one will think to look. So the picture being built from glacial archaeology is necessarily incomplete. It's valuable, it's informative, it changes understanding in important ways. But it's not comprehensive. It's a window, not a panorama, a glimpse, not a complete view. Still, she says, it's better than nothing. It's evidence that wouldn't exist otherwise. Without the preservation provided by the ice, these artifacts would have decomposed centuries ago. Without the warming climate causing the ice to retreat, they would remain frozen and inaccessible. The timing is narrow, the window between still frozen and exposed to decay, but it's open now, and the work is happening, and knowledge is being built that adds to human understanding of the past. You reach the base camp as evening settles in, the temperature dropping, the wind picking up. Inside the tent that serves as a field laboratory, you can see other researchers working, examining finds from earlier in the day, entering data into laptops, preparing samples for shipment back to laboratories. The textile fragment and arrow shaft will join the collection, will be cleaned and analysed and dated, and eventually published in academic journals and included in museum exhibits. They'll become data points in the larger project of understanding how people use mountain landscapes, how they adapted to changing conditions, how they moved and hunted and travelled through terrain that seems impossibly remote and harsh by modern standards, but for now they're just objects. Pieces of wood and fabric, dark and waterlogged, still carrying the cold of the ice they've been released from, waiting patiently for the next phase of analysis, the next stage in their transformation from artifacts to evidence to knowledge. The laboratory where artifacts from glacial archaeology are analysed is nothing like the mountain fieldwork. It's climate-controlled, precisely lit, equipped with microscopes and chemical testing equipment, and computers running specialised analytical software. You're visiting one of these labs, watching as a conservator works on a leather shoe that was found in a Norwegian ice patch the previous summer. The shoe is approximately 1,500 years old, dated through radiocarbon analysis of the leather itself. It's remarkably intact. The sole, the upper, even some of the stitching still visible, still holding the components together after a millennium and a half of frozen preservation. The conservator is working under magnification, examining the stitching pattern, documenting the construction technique. Each detail is noted, photographed, added to the growing database of information about this single object. The shoe is made from a single piece of leather, folded and stitched to create both the sole and the upper. The stitching is done with thread that appears to be plant fibre, possibly linden bast or nettle, materials that were commonly used for cordage in pre-modern Scandinavia. The stitches are regular and careful, showing skilled workmanship, someone who knew what they were doing and took the time to do it well. This kind of detailed construction analysis reveals more than just how the shoe was made. It reveals knowledge systems, technical traditions, the accumulated wisdom of generations of craftspeople who had figured out through trial and error what worked and what didn't. The choice of materials, the way they're prepared and joined, the patterns of wear visible on the sole. All of this is information, is evidence of choices made and challenges addressed. The conservator points out a repair visible on one side of the shoe. The leather has torn, probably from normal wear, and someone has patched it, adding a piece of material and stitching it in place. The repair is competent, but not as neat as the original construction, suggesting it was done in the field, by the wearer or a companion using whatever materials were available. That repair is significant. It tells you that the shoe was valued enough to be worth repairing rather than discarding. It suggests that footwear was difficult or expensive to replace, that people took care of their equipment because getting new equipment wasn't simple or easy. It indicates that the person wearing this shoe was travelling, was away from home or a settled community where more resources might have been available for making or trading for new shoes. And then, at some point, the shoe was lost. Maybe it came off in a stream crossing. Maybe it was abandoned when it became too damaged to repair further. Maybe the person wearing it died, and the shoe was left with their body, was gradually covered by snow and ice. Whatever the circumstances, the shoe ended up in a location where it was buried by snow that compressed into ice. where it was sealed away from oxygen and bacteria and the normal processes of decay. And there it remained, perfectly preserved until the ice melted and it reappeared on the surface, still recognisable as a shoe, still interpretable, still able to reveal information about the person who made it and the person who wore it. You watch as the conservator moves to examine the sole where wear patterns are visible. The way a shoe wears tells you something about how it was used, what kind of terrain it was walked on, whether the wearer had a particular gait or favoured one foot. This shoe shows even wear across the sole, suggesting regular use on relatively smooth ground. Trails probably, established paths where the walking was predictable. But there's also damage that looks more catastrophic. Areas where the leather is torn or abraded in ways that suggest rough terrain, scrambling over rocks, the kind of wear that comes from going off trail in difficult conditions. The picture that emerges is of someone travelling through mountains, following established routes when possible, but also willing to go cross-country when necessary. Someone who took care of their equipment but also used it hard, who needed their shoes to be functional and was willing to repair them in the field to keep them that way. Next to the shoe on the lab bench is an arrow, one of dozens recovered from Norwegian ice patches over the past 2 decades. This one is particularly well preserved. The wooden shaft complete, the sinew binding intact, even fragments of the feather fletching still attached. The conservator explains that arrows like this one were composite constructions, made from multiple components carefully fitted together. The main shaft is pine, a relatively common wood that's lightweight and straight-grained. The foreshaft, the separate front section that held the arrowhead, is made from birch, denser and more impact-resistant. The 2 pieces are joined with a socket joint, the foreshaft tapered to fit into a carved recess in the main shaft. The whole thing bound together with sinew that shrinks as it dries, creating a tight, permanent connection. At the back of the shaft, the fletching is attached with more sinew binding, wrapped in a crisscross pattern that holds the feathers in place, while allowing them to curve naturally, creating the aerodynamic surface that stabilizes the arrow in flight. The level of craft visible in this arrow is remarkable. Every component is carefully selected and prepared. The shaft is smoothed and balanced. The bindings are tight and regular. The fletching, though fragmentary now, shows evidence of having been trimmed and shaped to precise specifications. This wasn't a quick improvised weapon. This was a tool made by someone with expertise, someone who understood the materials and the techniques, and had probably made hundreds of similar arrows over their lifetime. The kind of knowledge that comes from apprenticeship and practice, from being part of a community where these skills were valued and passed down through demonstration and hands-on teaching. Radiocarbon dating has placed this arrow at approximately 3,400 years old, firmly in the late Bronze Age. The person who made it lived in a world without iron tools, without written records, without most of the technologies that later societies would take for granted. But they had sophisticated knowledge of materials and construction, they had effective hunting technology, and they had the confidence and capability to travel into high mountain terrain in pursuit of game. The conservator moves to a different workstation where several pieces of textile are laid out on a padded surface. These are fragments, nothing complete, but enough to show construction details. The weave is visible, the individual threads still distinct despite centuries of burial in ice. The textiles are made from wool, which makes sense for this region and time period. Sheep were common in Scandinavia. Wool production was an established technology, and wool has properties that make it excellent for cold weather clothing. It insulates even when wet, it's durable, it can be woven or felted into various weights and textures. The weave pattern visible in these fragments is a simple tabby weave, the most basic form of textile construction, where warp and weft threads alternate over and under each other. It's not fancy or decorative, just functional, the kind of cloth that would be used for everyday clothing or bags or whatever needed to be made from fabric. But even this simple textile represents significant labour and knowledge. Someone had to shear the sheep, clean, and card the wool, spin it into thread, set up a loom and weave the cloth. Hours of work, probably days, to produce a piece of fabric that would then be cut and sewn into whatever was needed. And then that fabric ended up in the mountains, was lost or discarded, was covered by ice. And now it's here, in a laboratory, being examined under magnification, being documented and analysed and preserved for future study. The conservator explains that one of the challenges with glacial archaeology is conservation itself. These artefacts have been frozen for centuries or millennia. They're stable in that frozen state, but once they thaw, they become vulnerable. Organic materials start to decompose. Moisture inside the materials can cause damage as it freezes and thaws. Bacteria and fungi can begin to grow, so conservation is urgent. Artifacts need to be kept cold from the moment they're discovered until they can be properly stabilised. That usually means freeze drying, a process where the artifacts are frozen and then the ice is sublimated, converted directly from solid to gas in a vacuum chamber. This removes the moisture without allowing it to go through a liquid phase, preventing the damage that can occur when waterlogged materials dry out. After freeze drying, the artifacts are more stable, can be handled and examined more safely. But they're still fragile, still vulnerable to damage from handling, from exposure to light, from fluctuations in temperature and humidity. So they're stored in carefully controlled conditions, accessed only when necessary for study or display. The conservator shows you the storage area, a climate-controlled room where artifacts from multiple field seasons are carefully archived. Shelves hold boxes and containers, each labelled with identification numbers, dates, locations. Inside are the physical remains of past lives, shoes and arrows and textiles and tools, all recovered from melting ice, all carefully preserved and documented. It's a strange kind of museum, you think, not organised for public display, not arranged to tell a narrative, just a systematic collection of objects and information, raw material for research and understanding. But it's valuable precisely because it's systematic, because the focus is on preservation and documentation rather than presentation. These artifacts are evidence first, museum pieces second. They're here to be studied, to be analysed, to reveal information that can't be obtained any other way. The conservator pulls out one more item to show you, something different from the hunting equipment and textiles. It's a wooden ski, approximately 4,000 years old, recovered from an ice patch in northern Norway. The ski is narrow and long, carved from a single piece of pine. The top surface is flat with a slight depression near the centre where the foot would rest. The bottom surface shows careful shaping, slightly concave lengthwise to improve glide and control. Near the centre there's a foothold, a raised ridge that the foot would fit behind, held in place with a leather strap or cord. This is sophisticated snow travel technology, representing centuries of accumulated knowledge about how to move efficiently through winter landscapes. Skis like this one allowed people to travel across snow that would be impassable on foot, to hunt, to visit neighbours, to move between settlements during months when other forms of travel were impossible. The presence of 4,000-year-old skis in Norwegian ice tells you that winter travel was not just possible but routine, that people had developed effective technologies for dealing with snow and cold, that high-latitude life was sustainable and productive even in the depths of winter. And the fact that this ski survived, was preserved in ice for 4 millennia, is a reminder of how much has been lost. For every artifact that's recovered, there are probably hundreds or thousands that decomposed without a trace. The glacial archaeology record is biased toward the exceptional, the lucky accidents of preservation, the objects that happen to end up in conditions where ice could seal them away. But even this biased, incomplete record is transforming understanding of the past. Before glacial archaeology became possible, before the ice started retreating and revealing what it had preserved, knowledge about how people lived in these environments was based mostly on inference and reconstruction. Now there's direct physical evidence, actual objects that were used by actual people, that show rather than suggest how things were done. The conservator returns the ski to its storage box, handles it with practiced care. These artifacts are irreplaceable, she reminds you. Once they're gone, they're gone. The ice that preserved them is melting, is not going to refreeze. The window for recovery is now, this generation, these few decades when the ice is retreating but hasn't disappeared entirely. After that, whatever artifacts remain buried will likely be exposed to weathering and decay. The ice will be gone, the preservation will end, and the slow process of decomposition will resume. In a century or two, most of what's currently frozen will be reduced to fragments or dust, unrecognisable and uninterpretable. So the work is urgent, not in a dramatic save-the-world sense, but in a practical, time-sensitive sense. There's a finite window, a brief period when this recovery is possible. After that, the opportunity will be gone. Back in the mountains, the researcher is conducting another survey, this time in a different area where glacial retreat has accelerated in recent years. The landscape here is more dramatic. Steep slopes, exposed rock faces, a glacier terminus that's retreated several hundred meters in the past decade. The retreat is visible in the landscape itself. The glacier sits in its valley like water in a slowly draining bathtub, its edges pulling back year by year, exposing ground that's been covered for centuries. The rock near the ice edge is freshly scoured, still showing the striations and polish left by glacial movement. Further from the ice, where the ground has been exposed longer, vegetation is starting to colonise, mosses and lichens at first, then hardy grasses and small shrubs. This is primary succession, the slow process of biological colonisation that happens when new land is exposed. It takes time, decades or centuries, for soil to develop, for plants to establish, for the full complexity of an ecosystem to emerge. But it's happening, right here, in real time, as the ice continues its retreat. The researcher is interested in a particular area near the edge of an ice patch, a location where previous surveys found fragments that suggested more might be present. The ice patch is separate from the main glacier, a remnant of accumulated snow that's been semi-permanent for as long as anyone can remember, but is now visibly shrinking year by year. Ice patches like this one are particularly important for glacial archaeology. Unlike glaciers, which flow and move and can carry objects great distances from where they were deposited, ice patches are relatively static. They accumulate snow, compress it into ice, but don't flow significantly. So artifacts found near ice patches are usually close to where they were originally lost or deposited. This makes interpretation easier. If you find an arrow near an ice patch, it was probably lost by a hunter who was using the ice patch, probably hunting reindeer or other animals that congregate on patches of old snow to escape heat and insects in summer. If you find a collection of tools, it probably indicates a hunting camp or rest stop, a place where people pause during their travels. The researcher moves carefully across the exposed ground, eyes constantly scanning. She's developed an almost instinctive sense for what might be an artifact, what shapes and colours and textures are worth investigating. Most of what she sees is natural: rocks, vegetation, the organic litter that accumulates wherever snow melts. But occasionally something stands out, something that doesn't quite fit the pattern. She stops, focuses on a dark line visible in the gravel a few metres ahead. It's straight, too straight to be a natural stick or root. She approaches carefully, crouches, examines it without touching. It's wood, definitely worked, carved smooth. Only a small section is visible above the surface, maybe 10 centimetres, but that's enough to identify it as potentially significant. She begins the documentation process, photographs, measurements, GPS coordinates, before attempting to extract it. When she does begin to excavate around the object, working carefully with a small trowel, more of it is revealed. It's a shaft, approximately a metre long, carved from a single piece of wood. One end is shaped to a blunt point. The other end has been hollowed out slightly, creating a socket that would have held another component. Based on the size and proportions, the researcher identifies it as likely a hunting spear or a ski pole. Both were common in this region historically. Both would have been made from similar materials and construction techniques. Distinguishing between them requires looking at other features: wear patterns, the shape of the socket, comparison with other known examples. She extracts the shaft carefully, supporting it as she lifts it free from the gravel. The wood is solid despite its age, the preservation excellent. Once it's out, she can examine it more closely, can see the tool marks where it was shaped, can feel the smooth surface that results from careful finishing. This object represents hours of work. Someone selected a suitable tree, cut it, stripped off the bark, shaped the wood through a combination of carving and scraping and smoothing. The result is a functional tool, well made and effective. And then it was lost, dropped in the mountains, covered by snow, buried in the growing ice patch. And there it remained until now, until warming temperatures caused the ice to melt and the shaft to reappear on the surface. The researcher places the shaft in a padded container, adds it to the collection from this field season. She'll continue the survey, will check other areas where artefacts might be appearing, but this find alone makes the trip worthwhile. Another data point, another piece of physical evidence about how people used this landscape in the past. As the day continues, more finds emerge. A fragment of leather that might be from a shoe or bag. Several pieces of worked wood, too degraded to identify precisely but clearly anthropogenic. A bone, probably from a reindeer, showing cut marks that indicate butchering. Each find is documented, collected, added to the growing archive. The process is repetitive, methodical, but it's the only way to ensure that information is preserved, that each artifact is properly contextualized, that the data will be usable for future research. By late afternoon, the researcher has covered several square kilometers of exposed ground, has documented dozens of potential features, has collected a dozen artifacts that will be analysed back at the laboratory. It's good work, productive work, the kind of field day that justifies the effort and expense of mounting an expedition to these remote locations. But it's also bittersweet, in a way. Each artifact recovered is one that won't be destroyed by exposure to the elements. But for every artifact found, there are probably others that have been exposed, weathered, and decomposed before anyone saw them. The race between discovery and decay is ongoing, and decay doesn't take breaks, doesn't have off-seasons, doesn't require funding or permits. The ice is melting, the artifacts are appearing, and the small community of glacial archaeologists is doing what it can to document and recover what's being revealed before it's too late. The researcher packs up her equipment as the sun begins its descent. Tomorrow she'll be back. We'll cover different ground. We'll continue the systematic survey that is the backbone of glacial archaeology. But for today, the work is done, the finds are collected, and another small piece of the past has been preserved for future study. Evening at base camp finds you reviewing the day's photographs while the researchers discuss their findings over dinner. The conversation is technical but animated, focused on the details of what was found and what it might mean. The spear shaft or ski pole is generating particular interest. Its length and proportions are unusual, don't quite match other known examples from the region. The socket at one end is also distinctive, shaped in a way that suggests it was designed to hold a specific kind of attachment. One researcher thinks it might be a specialised hunting weapon, perhaps for a particular type of game. Another argues it's more likely a multi-purpose tool, something that could function as both walking stick and weapon depending on circumstances. The debate is good-natured, grounded in evidence and comparison with other known artifacts. This is how understanding develops, through careful observation, through comparison and analysis, through the gradual accumulation of data that allows patterns to emerge and interpretations to be tested. Someone mentions that a colleague in Canada has been finding similar artifacts in Yukon ice patches, evidence that the same kinds of technologies were being used across vast distances. The hunting strategies, the travel patterns, the basic approaches to surviving and thriving in high-latitude environments, these seem to have been remarkably consistent across cultures separated by thousands of kilometres. That consistency is interesting. It suggests that there are optimal solutions to certain environmental challenges, approaches that work well enough that they get independently developed or spread through cultural exchange across large regions. The composite arrow construction, for example, appears in archaeological contexts from Norway to Alaska, all dating to similar time periods, all showing the same basic design principles even if the specific details vary. Is that independent invention or cultural diffusion? It's hard to say, probably some combination of both. People are inventive, figure things out independently when faced with similar challenges. But people also travel, trade, share information, learn from each other. The ancient world was more connected than popular imagination often suggests. The artifacts emerging from the ice support this picture of mobility and connection. The presence of hunting equipment at high elevations indicates people were ranging widely, following game, exploring and utilising marginal environments. The presence of textiles and tools suggests trade networks, because not all materials and skills were available in all locations. Someone built the spear shaft found today, but the person who built it might not have been the same person who used it. The raw material might have come from one location, the shaping done in another, the final object traded or gifted to someone in a third location who then carried it up into the mountains where it was eventually lost. Tracing these networks, understanding these connections, is part of what makes archaeology valuable. It's not just about finding old objects, it's about reconstructing the social and economic systems that produced those objects, the human relationships and exchanges that moved materials and ideas across landscapes. The conversation shifts to broader questions about climate and adaptation. The artifacts being found in glacial ice date from periods when the climate was warmer, when ice patches were smaller or absent, when mountain routes were more easily passable. Those periods correspond to what climate scientists call the Holocene climatic optimum and the medieval warm period, times when average temperatures in the northern hemisphere were somewhat higher than in the centuries immediately before or after. During those warm periods, people adapted by expanding into marginal environments, by using high mountain passes, by developing technologies and strategies that allowed them to exploit resources in areas that were borderline habitable. They thrived, established patterns and traditions, built knowledge systems that were passed down through generations. And then the climate cooled. Not catastrophically, not overnight, but gradually, persistently, over decades and centuries. The ice patches grew, the mountain passes became less reliable, more dangerous, eventually impassable. Routes that had been used for generations were abandoned. People adapted again, found different routes, adjusted their patterns, survived and continued. But the knowledge of the old routes, the specific details of how to travel through high mountain terrain, that knowledge faded, was lost, became irrelevant because the conditions that made it useful no longer existed. Until now. Until the climate shifted again, temperatures rose and the ice began to retreat. The old routes are reappearing, the artifacts are emerging, and the knowledge of how people lived and travelled in those past warm periods is becoming accessible again. It's a reminder that climate has always changed, that human societies have always adapted to changing conditions. The past offers examples of how people responded to warming, to cooling, to shifts in precipitation and seasonality. Those examples don't provide simple answers to modern challenges. The scale and rate of current climate change is unprecedented, and modern society is vastly more complex than anything in the archaeological record. But the past does provide perspective. It shows that adaptation is possible, that humans are creative and resilient, that knowledge and technology can be developed to meet new challenges. It also shows that adaptation sometimes means leaving places that become uninhabitable, that not all changes can be fully mitigated, that there are costs and losses alongside the innovations and adjustments. The researchers continue their discussion as darkness settles over the mountains. Outside, the temperature drops, the wind picks up, and somewhere nearby the ice continues its slow retreat, millimetre by millimetre, exposing more ground, revealing more artefacts, offering more glimpses into the past. Tomorrow the work will continue, more surveys, more documentation, more careful collection and preservation of artefacts that are appearing after centuries of frozen darkness. It's patient work, unglamorous work, the kind of archaeology that happens in remote locations with minimal public attention. But it matters. It's expanding knowledge, recovering information that would otherwise be lost, building understanding about how humans have lived and adapted in challenging environments throughout history. The glacier doesn't care about any of that. It just melts, following the physics of heat transfer and phase change, responding to temperature and solar radiation, indifferent to the human meanings assigned to what it reveals. But the people doing this work care. They see value in the fragments and traces emerging from the ice. They invest time and effort in documenting and preserving what's being revealed. They ask questions and seek answers, build interpretations and test hypotheses, contribute to the collective human project of understanding where we come from and how we got here. And slowly, artifact by artifact, site by site, the picture emerges. Not complete, never complete, always fragmentary and partial, but real, grounded in physical evidence, in objects that can be held and examined, in patterns that can be documented and analysed. The past is coming back, piece by piece, as the ice releases what it has held for so long. And for this brief window, this moment when the ice is retreating but the artefacts haven't all decomposed, there's an opportunity to recover and preserve evidence that will be gone forever if it's not collected now. So the work continues. The researchers return to the mountains each summer, monitor the ice edges, search the exposed ground, document what they find. It's slow work, patient work, the kind of science that doesn't produce dramatic breakthroughs, but does produce steady accumulation of knowledge. And in laboratories and museums and archives, the artifacts are preserved, the data is organised, the patterns are analysed, papers are written, presentations given, exhibitions mounted. The information diffuses into the broader academic community, into public awareness, into the general understanding of human history and adaptation. The ice is melting, the past is emerging, and for those who know how to look, how to interpret what's being revealed, it's a remarkable time, a unique window into periods that were previously accessible only through inference and reconstruction. You're back at the site one final time before the season ends and winter returns. The snow is already starting to fall at higher elevations, dusting the peaks, beginning the process that will seal everything away again for another year. The exposed ground where artifacts were found is already partially covered with fresh snow. By next week it will probably be completely buried. The artifacts that were recovered are safe, are already in laboratories being analysed and preserved. But anything that remains undiscovered will spend another winter frozen, another season sealed beneath snow and ice. The researcher is making final documentation, taking photographs that show the site in its late season condition, noting what's visible and what's already been covered by new snowfall. These observations will be compared with next summer's survey. Will show how the ice edge has moved, how much new ground has been exposed, what changes have occurred. It's part of the long-term monitoring that makes glacial archaeology possible. Individual finds are valuable, but patterns emerge from systematic observation over time. Seeing how quickly the ice is retreating, which areas are being exposed, what kinds of artifacts are appearing, all of this builds understanding not just of the past, but of the present process of revelation. The wind is cold, carrying flakes of snow that sting exposed skin. Winter is asserting itself, reclaiming the mountains, restoring the patterns that have dominated these landscapes for most of recent history. The brief summer window when the ground is exposed and accessible is closing. You think about cycles, about the way the landscape oscillates between frozen and thawed, accessible and sealed, revealing and concealing. The ice advanced, buried the artifacts, preserved them. The ice is retreating, exposing the artifacts, allowing them to be found. But eventually, decades from now, centuries from now, the climate will cool again, the ice will return, and what's being revealed now will be buried once more. Or maybe not. Maybe the current warming trend will continue, will accelerate, will result in the complete disappearance of these glaciers and ice patches. In that scenario, everything that's currently frozen will be exposed, will have its brief moment of accessibility before weathering and decay reduce it to nothing. Either way, this moment, this period when the ice is retreating but hasn't disappeared, is unique, unrepeatable. The window for glacial archaeology is now. In a generation or two, the window will close one way or another. Either there will be no more ice to retreat, or the ice will have advanced again, and the artifacts will be sealed away once more. The researcher takes a few final photographs, then begins packing up her equipment. It's time to head down, to close the base camp, to end the field season. Next summer, she'll be back. We'll check these same locations, we'll see what new ground has been exposed, what new artifacts have appeared. But for now, the work is done. The mountain is reclaiming its solitude, and beneath the falling snow, the ice holds what it holds, keeping its secrets until the next round of melting reveals them. You take one last look at the landscape before turning to follow the researcher down the mountain. The glacier looms above, massive and ancient, its surface crevassed and blue in the fading light. Below, the valley stretches away, already filling with evening shadow. Somewhere beneath that ice, there are probably more artifacts, more arrows and tools, more textiles and shoes, more fragments of lives lived centuries ago. Some will be revealed in coming years as the ice continues to retreat. Others will remain buried, will never be found, will be lost when the ice finally disappears and takes its remaining secrets with it. That's the nature of preservation and loss. Not everything can be saved. Not everything will be found. The glacial archaeology record will always be incomplete, always be a sampling rather than a comprehensive collection. But what has been found, what is being found each summer as the ice retreats, that's valuable beyond measure. Each artifact is a connection to the past, a tangible link to people who lived and worked and travelled in these mountains, when conditions were different, when routes that are now sealed were open, when knowledge that is now lost was current and practical. The snow is falling harder now, accumulating quickly on the exposed ground. You walk carefully, following the researcher's footsteps, making your way down to warmer elevations. Behind you, the site disappears beneath its winter blanket, hidden once again, waiting patiently for next summer when the cycle will repeat. This is how glacial archaeology happens, season by season, year by year, gradually recovering what the ice has preserved and is now releasing. It's slow work, but it's steady work. And with each passing summer, more is learned, more is understood, more pieces of the past are recovered and preserved. The ice is melting, the past is emerging. And for this brief window in geological time, humans have the opportunity to witness and document what's being revealed. You reach the lower elevations as darkness settles over the mountains. The snow is lighter here, not yet accumulating, just falling and melting, falling and melting. Above, the peaks disappear into clouds, the glacier invisible in the darkness and weather. But it's there, still retreating, still revealing, still holding artifacts that will appear next summer, or the summer after, or in years further in the future. The process continues whether anyone is watching or not, driven by climate and physics rather than human observation. But the observation matters, the documentation matters, the careful collection and preservation and analysis, all of it matters, because without it the artifacts would appear and weather away and be lost, and the information they contain would be gone forever. So the work continues, will continue next season, and the seasons after, as long as the ice keeps retreating and artifacts keep appearing. It's a unique moment in human history, this window when the past is being revealed at an unprecedented rate, when knowledge that was lost is becoming accessible again. And somewhere in that process, in the patient work of documenting and studying and interpreting what's emerging from the ice, there's a kind of quiet victory. Not over time or entropy, those forces are unstoppable, but over forgetting, over the silence that would otherwise swallow these lives and these stories. The artifacts speak if you know how to listen. They tell of people who adapted to harsh environments, who developed sophisticated technologies, who travelled and hunted and lived in places that seem impossibly remote by modern standards. They tell of resilience and ingenuity, of knowledge passed down through generations, of the fundamental human capacity to survive and even thrive in challenging conditions. And they remind us that the past is not separate from the present, that the landscapes we inhabit have been inhabited before, that the challenges we face have been faced in different forms by those who came before us. The ice is melting, the past is waking up, and for those paying attention, for those doing the patient work of documentation and preservation, it's a remarkable gift. This window into times and lives that would otherwise remain forever hidden beneath the ice. Long before modern medicine offered pills in bottles, human beings understood something fundamental about the natural world. Certain plants possessed the quiet power to calm the restless mind, ease the tired body, and invite sleep when it refused to come. Across continents and centuries, people cultivated relationships with specific herbs and flowers, passing down methods of preparation through generations, creating rituals that transformed simple leaves and roots into gateways toward rest. The reed basket sits heavy in your hands as you wade through the shallows of the Nile Delta, somewhere in the Middle Kingdom period when Egypt's agricultural rhythms have already shaped civilization for over 1,000 years. The water reaches just above your ankles, warm during the day but holding a pleasant coolness now as the sun angles lower across the papyrus marshes. You're here for the blue lotus, those pale flowers that close their petals as darkness approaches, though a few still float open on the surface, their blue-white petals reflecting the amber light. Nobody thinks of these flowers as exotic. They're as common as reeds, growing in every waterway, painted on every temple wall, carved into columns, and woven into the headdresses of both gods and nobles. But their commonness doesn't diminish their usefulness, particularly as the day's work concludes and the body begins to register its accumulated fatigue. You reach down and cut several stems just below the waterline, where they're thick and green. The flowers will be used fresh tonight. There's no need to dry them when they grow this abundantly. The basket fills slowly as you move through the marsh, selecting blooms that haven't fully closed yet, ones that still hold their shape. Your feet sink slightly into the soft mud below the water with each step, and somewhere nearby a heron watches your progress with the patience of a creature that has all evening to hunt. By the time you return to shore, the basket holds perhaps 24 flowers, their stems dripping water that catches the low sun. The village sits a short walk inland, where the ground rises just enough to stay dry during the annual floods. Smoke already drifts from cooking fires, and the air carries that particular mixture of baked earth, livestock, and the green smell of the river that defines every Egyptian settlement. Inside the house, the preparation requires no elaborate equipment. You strip the petals from their centres, letting them fall into a wide clay bowl. They bruise easily under your fingers, releasing a faint, sweet scent that's somehow both floral and earthy. The petals go into a jar of wine that's been warming gently near the fire. Not hot, just warm enough that when you pour it over the crushed flowers, they begin to release their essence immediately. The colour seeps into the liquid, turning it a cloudy blue-white. This isn't about getting drunk. The wine serves as a carrier, a way to extract what the flower offers. You let it sit while preparing the evening meal, while sweeping the floor, while the daylight fades from gold to grey outside the small window. By the time true darkness arrives and the oil lamps are lit, the infusion is ready. You strain out the wilted petals through a piece of linen, leaving behind a liquid that's taken on both the colour and the subtle sedative properties of the lotus. The drink tastes sweet, slightly perfumed, with the wine's grape flavour softened by something harder to name. Green, botanical, faintly bitter underneath the sweetness. You sip it slowly, sitting on a low stool while the day's heat radiates up from the mud brick walls. The effect isn't dramatic. There's no sudden drowsiness, no overwhelming urge to lie down immediately. Instead, the edges of wakefulness become softer. The thoughts that typically chase each other through your mind as you try to sleep, tomorrow's tasks, unresolved disputes, worries about the flood level or the grain stores, these don't disappear, but they lose their urgency. The sleeping mat has been rolled out on the floor, layered with linen that stays relatively cool despite the lingering warmth. You lie down while there's still a bit of oil left in the lamp, watching the small flame create moving shadows on the ceiling. The lotus makes the transition from wakefulness to sleep less of a border and more of a gradual slope. You're aware of sliding down it, noticing the way your limbs grow heavy, the way your breathing deepens without any conscious effort to control it. This ritual happens throughout the Nile Valley, in houses grand and modest. The lotus appears in artwork not because it's rare or sacred in the distant sense, but because it's intimately familiar, part of the daily negotiation with consciousness and rest. The priests use it before certain ceremonies, the wealthy serve it at evening gatherings, and ordinary farmers like yourself employ it simply because the river provides it freely, and the effect is reliable. By morning the empty cup sits where you left it, a faint residue of blue staining its interior. The lotus flowers in the marsh will open again with the sun, and tomorrow evening the same process can repeat, as dependable as the river's flood cycle, as ordinary as bread. The hillside above the Greek settlement climbs at an angle that makes your thighs burn, even though you've walked these slopes your entire life. It's late summer, and the vegetation has that dried-out, dusty quality that comes after months without rain. But you're not here for the grasses that crunch under your feet, or the scattered olive trees that provide minimal shade. You're looking for valerian, which prefers the damper spots where springs seep from the hillside and keep the ground soft even in August. You find the first patch growing near a limestone outcrop where water trickles year-round, creating a zone of green in the otherwise brown landscape. The valerian stands waist-high, its clusters of tiny pink-white flowers mostly faded now, gone to seed. But it's the roots you need, thick and fibrous, growing deep into the moist soil. You've brought a digging tool, a simple iron blade attached to a wooden handle, and the work of extraction is neither quick nor easy. The first root comes free after considerable effort, bringing with it a clump of dark earth. The smell hits immediately, musty, earthy, vaguely unpleasant, like damp socks stored too long in a closed chest. It's the kind of odour that makes you understand why some people refuse to use this plant no matter how well it works. You knock off the excess dirt and drop the root into your collection bag, then start on the next one. By the time you've gathered enough roots to last through the autumn months, the sun has moved perceptibly across the sky, and your fingernails are packed with soil. The walk back down the hillside is easier on the legs but harder on the knees, and you take it slowly, letting gravity do most of the work while you maintain balance on the rocky path. At home, the roots need washing before anything else. You scrub them in a basin of water drawn from the village well, removing the dirt to reveal pale, twisted shapes that look less like medicine and more like something you'd throw on a compost heap. They need to dry before they can be stored, so you spread them on a flat rock in the courtyard where the afternoon sun still reaches, turning them occasionally so all sides get air. The actual preparation for sleep won't happen until weeks from now, when these roots have dried completely and can be grated into a powder. But you already know how that will go because you've done it countless times. A small amount of the powder, about as much as you can pinch between thumb and forefinger, goes into warm water or wine. The drink that results tastes terrible, earthy and bitter with a lingering aftertaste that makes you wish you'd eaten something sweet afterward. But approximately an hour later, sometimes less, the effect arrives. It's different from wine drunk or the pleasant haze of lotus. Valerian doesn't make you feel good exactly. It makes you feel less. less alert, less interested in staying awake, less bothered by the discomforts that usually delay sleep. The rock that's somehow under the sleeping mat despite your best efforts to smooth the floor, the neighbour's dog that barks at shadows, the slight chill that creeps in after midnight. The Greeks approach this plant with the practicality they bring to most things. There's no ritual attached to it, no prayers or special timing. It's a tool, like a hammer or a plough, meant to accomplish a specific task. When sleep won't come naturally, when worry or pain keeps the mind churning through the dark hours, you use valerian. Simple as that. You've noticed that it works better on some people than others. Your brother claims it does nothing for him except make his stomach uneasy. Your cousin swears it's the only thing that lets her sleep during the full moon, when some personal sensitivity to light keeps her restless. You fall somewhere in the middle. It works consistently and reliably, but it's not pleasant enough to use casually. You save it for the nights when you know sleep will be difficult, when you've had an argument with someone, or when your mind is already picking at a problem before you've even lain down. The dried roots, once they're ready, get stored in a ceramic jar with a tight-fitting lid to contain that distinctive smell. The jar sits on a shelf with other practical items: olive oil, dried figs, a small amount of honey. Nothing ceremonial or precious, just another household substance with a specific use. On the nights when you do prepare the valerian drink, you do it without enthusiasm, but also without hesitation. You grate the root, add the powder to warm water, stir it until the bits are somewhat suspended in the liquid, and drink it quickly to minimize the taste. Then you go about the business of preparing for sleep, banking the fire, checking that the door is secured, arranging the bedding. By the time you lie down, the valerian is already beginning its work, creating a heaviness in your thoughts, a disinclination to move or think or do anything except sink into the darkness behind your closed eyes. Sleep arrives like a slowly closing door rather than a sudden drop. You're aware of it approaching, feel yourself moving toward it, and then you're simply there, on the other side, unconscious until the dawn birds start their noise. The monastery garden sits enclosed by stone walls that block the wind but let in the sun, creating a microclimate warm enough to grow herbs that would struggle in the harsher conditions beyond. You tend this garden as part of your duties, one among several brothers assigned to maintaining the plants that serve both kitchen and infirmary. It's spring, and the lavender you planted last autumn has survived the winter, putting out new growth from woody stems that looked dead a month ago. The monastic day follows a rhythm that divides darkness and light into prescribed portions: prayers at specific hours, work during daylight, sleep during a fixed period that nonetheless never feels quite long enough. The bell that signals the night office also interrupts sleep just as it's reaching its deepest point, pulling you from unconsciousness to stumble through hymns in a cold chapel before returning to bed for a few more hours. This pattern, repeated daily for years, creates a particular kind of weariness, one that accumulates gradually and never fully resolves. The lavender helps, not dramatically, not perfectly, but enough to matter. You harvest it in late summer when the flowers have opened fully but haven't yet begun to fade, cutting the stems in the morning after the dew has dried, but before the day's heat has driven off the volatile oils that carry the plant's properties. The cutting fills the garden with scent, that distinctive combination of floral sweetness and camphor sharpness that you'd recognize anywhere, even blindfolded. You bundle the cut stems with twine and hang them upside down in the drying room, a small stone chamber with good air circulation and no direct sunlight. They'll hang there for several weeks, slowly releasing moisture until the flowers feel crisp and the stems have gone brittle. The drying process concentrates the scent, making it stronger, almost overwhelming when you first enter the room after the door has been closed for days. Once dried, the lavender has multiple uses. The kitchen uses it sparingly in certain dishes. The infirmary keeps it for washing wounds, claiming it helps prevent infection, but the largest portion gets reserved for sleep preparation, divided among the brothers according to need. You keep a supply in your cell, a sparse room with a sleeping platform, a small table, and a niche in the wall for prayer. Before the night office, when you know you'll need to fall back asleep quickly after being woken, you prepare a simple lavender infusion. The process requires only hot water and a handful of dried flowers, steeped until the water takes on a pale purple tint and the scent fills the small space. The drink tastes floral, slightly bitter, more pleasant than valerian, but less sweet than lotus-infused wine. You sip it while reading by candlelight, usually something devotional that won't stimulate the mind too much. The lavender's effect is subtle. more of a quieting than a sedation. Your thoughts don't vanish, but they move more slowly with less urgency. The physical restlessness that usually makes the hour before sleep uncomfortable, the need to shift position constantly, to scratch at nothing in particular, to feel vaguely dissatisfied with every arrangement of pillow and blanket, this eases away. When the bell rings for the night office, you rise from a light sleep, the kind that releases you easily rather than dragging you back down. You file into the chapel with the other brothers, stand through the prayers and responses, and then return to your cell while the lavender's influence still lingers. This second sleep comes faster than the first, your body grateful to return to unconsciousness, the lavender smoothing the transition. Some brothers prefer to keep dried lavender in a cloth bag under their pillows, claiming the scent alone provides benefit. You've tried this and found it less effective than drinking the infusion, but you appreciate the logic. The scent is undeniably calming, associated so strongly with rest that merely smelling it creates a kind of psychological preparation for sleep. The monastery garden also grows chamomile, another plant valued for its calming properties. The chamomile flowers in early summer, producing small white blooms with yellow centres that smell of apples when crushed. You harvest these too, drying them alongside the lavender, sometimes mixing the two for an infusion that combines chamomile's gentle apple sweetness with lavender's more complex floral notes. On the worst nights, when anxiety about some failing or concern about the community keeps your mind too active for sleep, you prepare a stronger infusion using both herbs, steeping them longer than usual, making the drink more potent. These nights are relatively rare. The monastic schedule generally exhausts you thoroughly enough that sleep comes regardless of your mental state. But they do occur, and having the herbs available provides both practical relief and psychological comfort. The garden itself becomes part of the sleep preparation simply through the work of maintaining it. The repetitive tasks of weeding, watering and pruning occupy the hands while leaving the mind free to settle. The scents rise from the plants whenever you brush against them, and over time the association between those scents and rest becomes deeply established. You can walk through the garden in the afternoon and feel a hint of sleepiness, triggered purely by the smell of lavender warming in the sun. The monastery keeps records of herb cultivation and usage, written in the same careful hand used for copying scripture. These records note which plants grow well in which locations, which combinations seem most effective, which brothers prefer which preparations. It's a practical accumulation of knowledge, driven by the simple goal of making the community's mandatory sleep schedule slightly more functional despite its constant interruptions. You write occasional entries in these records yourself, noting that the lavender planted on the south side of the garden produces more fragrant flowers than the north side planting, or that chamomile steeped for 10 minutes seems more effective than 5 minutes steeping, or that mixing the two herbs creates an effect different from using either alone. These observations aren't scientific in the modern sense, but they're methodical, based on repeated experience, and they slowly build into a body of practical knowledge. Years of using these herbs create their own kind of dependence, not in the sense of addiction, but in the sense of habit. You've grown accustomed to the ritual of preparation, the familiar tastes and scents, the reliable, if mild, effects. On the rare occasions when the garden supply runs low before the next harvest, when you must try to sleep without the usual infusion, you notice the absence more than you'd expect. Sleep still comes eventually, but it feels harder one, less smooth in its arrival. The Roman bathhouse represents a different approach to rest, one that combines heat, water, and aromatic plants into a multi-stage process that occupies the late afternoon hours. You arrive while the sun still lights the entrance, but is low enough that the day's business is mostly concluded, the time when respectable citizens begin turning their attention toward evening pleasures and the inevitable approach of sleep. The complex sprawls across an entire city block, its rooms arranged in a sequence designed to gradually prepare the body for rest. You start in the changing room, removing your street clothes and donning the simple linen wrap that covers what modesty requires, while leaving most of your skin exposed to air and water. The floor beneath your feet is heated, warm enough to feel pleasant but not uncomfortable, powered by the hypocaust system that sends hot air through channels under the tiles. The first room beyond the entrance is the tepidarium, moderately warm, where your body begins adjusting to heat without the shock of sudden temperature change. The air here carries the scent of lavender and rose, oils that have been mixed with the water in the shallow pools and sprinkled on the heated floors. A few other bathers recline on stone benches along the walls, their faces slack with the beginning of relaxation. Nobody speaks much. The atmosphere discourages conversation, encouraging instead a kind of peaceful solitude even in the presence of others. You sit for a while, letting the warmth seep into muscles that have been tensed all day, feeling your shoulders drop and your breathing deepen. The scent of lavender grows more noticeable as your pores open, and you begin to understand how the Romans have refined this process beyond mere washing. This is theatre of relaxation, each stage carefully calibrated to move the body and mind toward a state of profound rest. When you're warm enough that a faint sweat has started on your forehead, you move to the caldarium, the hot room, where steam rises from pools of almost scalding water and the air is thick enough to make breathing require conscious effort. The heat here is intense, purposeful, designed to drive weariness from muscles and fog from mind. You lower yourself into one of the hot pools gradually, letting your body adjust to temperature that would be painful if entered too quickly. The water contains more than heat. Chamomile flowers float on the surface, bruised and broken, releasing their apple-sweet scent into the steam. Your skin turns pink, then red, as blood rushes to the surface. Sweat runs freely now, and you can feel your heart working harder to cool a body that's being deliberately overheated. The experience borders on uncomfortable, yet there's a strange pleasure in it, in pushing toward the edge of what you can tolerate and then staying there, letting the heat do its work. Other bathers come and go, immersing themselves briefly before retreating to cooler rooms. You stay longer, having learned that the real benefit comes from sustained exposure, from letting the heat penetrate deeply, rather than just warming the surface. Your thoughts become scattered, hard to hold on to, as if the heat is burning away your ability to maintain coherent worry. Eventually you pull yourself from the hot pool and move to the frigidarium, the cold room, where water so cold it makes you gasp waits in a deep plunge pool. The shock of this transition, from extreme heat to extreme cold, creates a sensation that's both jarring and strangely exhilarating. Your skin tightens, your breathing catches, and for a moment you feel intensely awake, more alert than you've been all day. But this alertness doesn't last. As you climb out of the cold pool and dry yourself with rough linen towels, a different kind of exhaustion settles over you, deeper and more thorough than simple tiredness. Your body has been put through a process, heated, cooled, heated again, that has recalibrated its basic functions. Your muscles feel loose and heavy. Your mind, cleared of thoughts by the heat, seems disinclined to generate new ones. The final stage involves massage with oils, and this is where the Romans demonstrate their most sophisticated understanding of plant-based relaxation. The masseur uses oil infused with lavender, chamomile and poppy, not opium, which is controlled and expensive, but the milder properties extracted from poppy petals. The oil is warm, worked into your back and shoulders with firm pressure that finds knots you didn't know existed and gradually breaks them down. The combination of physical manipulation and aromatic absorption creates an effect that's frankly soporific. You lie face down on a massage table while the masseur works methodically from neck to feet, and by the time they finish, you have to make conscious effort not to simply fall asleep right there on the table. The walk home happens in a kind of dream state, your body wrapped in clean clothes, your hair still damp, your skin carrying the lingering scent of lavender and chamomile. The evening air feels cool after the heat of the baths, pleasant against flushed skin. Other bathers move through the streets with the same slow, satisfied pace, a small population of people who have deliberately exhausted themselves in preparation for night. At home, you eat a light meal, the bathhouse routine works better on a not quite empty stomach, and then lie down while the sun's last light still shows outside. Sleep comes like a tide, unstoppable and complete, pulling you under in what feels like seconds. The plant oils on your skin continue releasing their scents throughout the night, though you're too unconscious to notice. Your breathing stays deep and regular, your muscles remain slack, and you sleep through until dawn without waking once. The Romans have systematized rest in a way that acknowledges its complexity. They understand that sleep isn't something that simply happens when you're tired, that it can be prepared for, staged, enhanced through deliberate manipulation of temperature, scent, and physical sensation. The bathhouse represents a community's collective agreement that rest deserves this much attention, this much infrastructure. Not everyone can afford the time or entrance fee for daily bathhouse visits, but those who can develop a dependency on the routine that goes beyond the physical effects of heat and aromatic oils. The ritual itself becomes sleep-inducing, the familiar progression through rooms and temperatures, the known scents and sensations. Your body begins anticipating rest as soon as you enter the changing room, and by the time you reach the massage table, you're already halfway asleep. The Persian garden sits surrounded by high walls that turn it into a world separate from the dusty streets beyond. Water channels divided into 4 quarters, following the ancient pattern that represents paradise. Each channel lined with tiles that stay cool even when the afternoon sun beats down on the paths. You walk along one of these channels as the day declines toward evening, appreciating the sound of running water, the shade provided by fruit trees, the careful arrangement of flowering plants that creates a sequence of scents changing with each season. Tonight the roses are blooming, dark red flowers that release their strongest perfume as temperature cools. But you're here for something more specific than general ambience. At the far end of the garden, where the walls create a corner that gets afternoon shade, a patch of poppies grows under careful supervision. These aren't the opium poppies, the ones that produce the sticky resin valued for both medicine and pleasure, tightly controlled and taxed. These are simpler varieties, grown for their petals rather than their sap, valued for the mild sedative properties that come from steeping those petals in water or wine. The flowers are just beginning to open, their tissue-thin petals unfurling in shades of red, pink and white. You've been told to harvest only the red ones, to take the petals at the moment when the flower is fully open but not yet beginning to fade. This requires checking the plants multiple times as evening approaches, watching for that perfect moment. When you find flowers at the right stage, you pluck the petals carefully, letting them fall into a basket lined with cloth to prevent bruising. The work is meditative in its own right, requiring close attention but not much thought. The garden sounds, water, birds settling for night, wind in the trees, create a background that encourages a quiet mind. The scent of roses mixes with the sharper smell of the herbs growing in another section, and as the light continues to fade, the garden's temperature drops to something almost comfortable after the day's heat. By the time you've collected enough petals, the sun has set and the sky is showing its first stars. You carry the basket inside to a preparation room where other servants are engaged in similar tasks, drying herbs, mixing oils, preparing the substances that will help the household's occupants move smoothly from waking to sleep. The red poppy petals require gentle handling. You spread them on a clean cloth, picking out any that are damaged or have insects clinging to them. The ones that pass inspection go into a jar of sweet wine, where they'll steep overnight, releasing their colour and properties into the liquid. By tomorrow evening, the wine will have turned a deep pink and taken on a subtle bitterness beneath its sweetness. You've tasted this preparation before, in small amounts, enough to understand what it does. The effect is gentler than valerian, less distinctive than lavender, more subtle than lotus. It softens the edges of awareness without creating obvious drowsiness, makes the prospect of sleep more appealing without forcing it. The Persian approach to rest favours this kind of subtlety, preferring gentle persuasion to blunt sedation. The household's evening routine incorporates multiple plant-based elements, each contributing to a general atmosphere of winding down. Incense burns in the main rooms, releasing the scent of sandalwood and frankincense. Rosewater gets sprinkled on linens and cushions. The wine served with dinner includes herbs known for their calming properties, not enough to be medicinal, just enough to contribute to the overall effect. This layering of scents and tastes, this careful construction of an environment conducive to rest, represents a different philosophy than using a single strong preparation. The Persians seem to believe that sleep comes best when approached from multiple directions simultaneously, when every sense receives gentle encouragement toward relaxation. The sleeping quarters open onto the garden, allowing night air to flow through. You can hear the water channels from your sleeping mat, their constant murmur providing sound that masks the occasional noise from the street beyond the walls. The linen smell of roses, the air carries hints of jasmine from flowers that bloom only at night, and your last drink of the evening, the poppy-infused wine, sits warm in your stomach, beginning its quiet work. Sleep arrives without drama, a gradual dimming of consciousness that happens while you're still noticing the scents and sounds around you. One moment you're aware of the water's sound and the jasmine's perfume, the next you're aware of nothing at all, dropped into unconsciousness so smoothly that there's no memory of the transition. The Persian emphasis on beauty extends even to the tools of rest. The jars that hold dried herbs are glazed in brilliant colours. The cups used for evening drinks are carved from jade or shaped from fine pottery. The incense burners are worked brass, decorated with patterns that catch lamplight. These aesthetic choices serve a purpose beyond mere decoration. They make the preparation for sleep feel ceremonial, important, worthy of attention and care. You wake once during the night when the moon has risen high enough to send light through the open wall of your sleeping chamber. The garden is silver and black, the water channels glinting where moonlight catches them, the flowers reduced to pale shapes. The jasmine's scent seems even stronger now, and you can hear a nightingale somewhere in the trees singing its complicated song to the darkness. You don't feel fully awake. More like you're observing from somewhere between sleep and waking, aware enough to register sensations but not alert enough to think about them. The poppy wine keeps you in this half state, neither pulling you back to full consciousness nor dropping you immediately into deep sleep. You drift there for a while, listening to the bird, breathing the flower-scented air, and then slide back under without choosing to, claimed again by unconsciousness. By morning the wine jar will be empty, the petals strained out and discarded, the evidence of last night's preparation cleared away. But tonight those petals are still doing their work, dissolved into liquid, absorbed into blood, contributing their small influence toward rest. The Ayurvedic physician's room smells of ground spices and dried roots, scents so complex and layered that identifying individual components becomes impossible. You sit on a low cushion while he asks questions about your sleep. How quickly it comes, how often you wake, how you feel upon rising, whether you dream, whether you wake refreshed or still tired. The questions are detailed, probing, searching for patterns that will help him determine which plant preparation will serve you best. He's already examined your pulse, your tongue, your eyes, making observations about your constitution that use terms you don't entirely understand. Something about an excess of vata, about air and movement needing to be calmed, about your mind being too active for your body's natural rhythms. The diagnosis leads to prescription, ashwagandha, an herb he describes as particularly useful for those whose sleep is disrupted by worry or mental restlessness. The ashwagandha root sits on a shelf behind him, dried and shriveled, looking unpromising. He takes down the container and begins grinding a portion of the root using a stone mortar and pestle, working with practiced efficiency until he has a fine powder. This powder goes into a cup along with warm milk and honey. The three ingredients stirred until the powder is suspended in the liquid. The mixture tastes earthy and slightly bitter, despite the honey, with an aftertaste that's hard to describe. Not unpleasant exactly, but distinctive enough that you understand you'll recognise this flavour if you taste it again. He instructs you to drink this preparation every evening, approximately 2 hours before you wish to sleep, and to continue for at least several weeks before judging its effectiveness. The theory, as he explains it, involves balancing energies and calming excess movement in both mind and body. The ashwagandha works slowly, building its effect over time rather than producing immediate drowsiness. You're meant to notice, after consistent use, that falling asleep requires less effort, that your mind quiets more readily when you lie down, that sleep itself is deeper and less interrupted by the thoughts that currently pull you back to partial wakefulness several times each night. You take home a supply of the ground root, enough for a month of daily use, along with instructions for preparation and timing. That evening you make the mixture yourself, copying what you watched him do, though your stirring is less thorough and some powder clings to the side of the cup. The taste is familiar from the sample you drank in his office. Earthy, warm from the milk, sweetened but not sweet. Nothing dramatic happens. You go about your evening routine, and when you lie down, sleep comes in its usual way, after the usual period of waiting and mind-wandering. You wonder if you've wasted money on something that doesn't work, if the physician's confidence was just salesmanship. But you continue the routine because you've paid for a month's supply, and because the physician was clear that the effect builds gradually. Each evening you prepare the ashwagandha milk, drink it while it's still warm, and continue with your normal activities for a couple of hours before attempting sleep. After a week, you notice something subtle. The transition from waking to sleep feels slightly smoother, less like struggling against your own mind. The thoughts that typically chase each other in circles as you lie in darkness, worries about money, replays of conversations that went badly, rehearsals of conversations that haven't happened yet. These still occur, but they seem to have less energy, less ability to hold your attention. After 2 weeks, the effect is clearer. You're falling asleep more quickly, and when you wake during the night, which still happens occasionally, you drift back under instead of lying awake for long periods. Your dreams become more vivid, though you're not sure if this is a property of the ashwagandha or simply because you're sleeping deeply enough to remember them better. The physician warned that ashwagandha works best as part of a broader approach to rest, and he gave you other instructions beyond just taking the nightly drink. You're meant to establish a consistent sleep schedule, going to bed and rising at the same hours each day. You're supposed to avoid stimulating activities in the evening, no vigorous exercise, no arguments, no intense thinking. Your last meal should be several hours before sleep, and it should be light rather than heavy. These behavioural changes probably contribute to the improving sleep as much as the herb itself, but they work together, each element supporting the others. The ashwagandha makes the behavioural changes more effective, while the consistent routine makes the herb's subtle effects more noticeable. The taste becomes familiar enough that you begin to anticipate it, to associate it with the evening's winding down. The ritual of preparation, warming the milk, stirring in the powder and honey, drinking it while it's still warm enough to feel comforting, this becomes as important as the substance itself. You're marking a boundary between day and night, between active hours and rest hours, using a plant that grows half a world away in climates nothing like yours. After the first month, you return to the physician for more supply and to report on effects. He seems unsurprised by your description, nodding as if this matches what he expected. He asks whether you want to continue or try something different, and you realise the question is easy. Whatever combination of factors has improved your sleep, you're not interested in changing it. You buy another month's supply, then another. The dependence that develops isn't addiction in any meaningful sense. You can sleep without the ashwagandha, and you've proven this on occasions when you've travelled or simply run out of supply. But sleep comes harder without it, less reliably, with more wakefulness during the night. The herb has become part of your body's expectation of evening, and removing it creates a gap that your physiology notices. Years of use create their own feedback loop. The improved sleep makes you generally calmer during the day, less prone to the anxiety that originally disrupted your rest. This daytime calmness should, theoretically, make the nighttime herb less necessary. But by now the ritual has become fixed, and you continue the nightly preparation more from habit than necessity, unable to imagine evenings without that familiar earthy taste, that feeling of having done something intentional to support rest. The convent's herbarium occupies a building separate from the main dormitory, its own stone structure with a tiled roof and windows facing south to maximise light. Inside, the air stays cool year-round, perfect for preserving dried plants that hang from ceiling beams in bundles or rest in labelled jars along the walls. You work here several hours each day, processing harvest from the garden, preparing medicines and helpful substances for the community. Today you're working with lemon balm, a plant that grows so enthusiastically in the garden that it requires constant harvesting to keep it from taking over the beds, meant for other herbs. The fresh stems are bright green, the leaves heavily textured and releasing their distinctive scent, lemony but also minty, slightly sharp whenever you brush against them. You strip leaves from stems, discarding any that show signs of disease or insect damage, keeping only the perfect ones for drying. The lemon balm will be used primarily in evening teas, both for the community here and for lay people who come seeking help with sleeplessness. It's gentler than valerian, more reliably effective than chamomile alone, and pleasant tasting enough that people actually enjoy drinking it rather than forcing it down as medicine. You work slowly, methodically, finding the rhythm that makes repetitive tasks meditative. Your hands move automatically, strip, inspect, keep or discard, while your mind stays mostly quiet, occasionally forming prayers but more often just resting in the simple, physical reality of the work. The scent of lemon balm fills the herbarium, fresh and clean, cutting through the mustier smells of dried roots and older herbs. Another sister enters carrying a basket of freshly harvested calendula flowers, their orange petals bright even in the dim interior light. She works at a different table, beginning her own processing task, and for a while you work in companionable silence, the kind of shared quiet that feels comfortable rather than awkward. The sleep preparation you'll make tonight for yourself uses lemon balm as its base but includes other herbs as well. a small amount of passion flower for its calming properties, a pinch of dried hops that contributes bitterness but also sedative effect, and a bit of lavender because the combination of lemon balm and lavender creates a taste more pleasant than either alone. The proportions matter. Too much hops makes the tea undrinkably bitter. Too little passion flower and you might as well just drink lemon balm by itself. You've learned these ratios through years of experimentation, adjusting and readjusting until finding a combination that tastes acceptable and produces reliable effects. The convent day includes evening prayers that happen after full darkness, requiring you to be awake at an hour when your body would prefer to be sleeping. The herbal tea helps with this strange schedule, allowing you to stay alert through the prayers without feeling wired or agitated, then facilitating quick sleep once you're finally allowed to retire. You prepare the tea in your cell using water heated over a small lamp, steeping the mixed herbs until the liquid turns pale yellow-green, and the combined scents fill the narrow space. The taste is complex: lemon balm's brightness, lavender's floral note, the bitter edge of hops, something harder to name that must come from the passion flower. You've grown to like it, or at least to appreciate it, the way you might appreciate any taste that's become deeply associated with rest. The prayers happen, as they always do, pulling you from the drowsy state the tea induces back to full wakefulness. You stand and kneel and sit through the familiar liturgy, your voice joining others in hymns you've sung so many times you could perform them while fully asleep. The chapel is cold, lit by candles that create more shadow than light, and you're grateful when the final prayers conclude and you're released back to your cell. Sleep comes quickly once you're horizontal, the herbs still working their way through your system, your body dropping into unconsciousness with the relief of a burden set down. You don't dream much, or at least you don't remember dreams, and you wake when the morning bell rings feeling more rested than the hours of actual sleep should allow. The herbarium keeps records, just like the monastery you once heard about, documenting which plants grow well in which conditions, which combinations seem most effective for which purposes, which sisters prefer, which preparations. These records aren't scientific, but they're systematic, building a body of knowledge that will survive beyond any individual's lifetime. You've made entries yourself, noting that lemon balm planted in partial shade produces more aromatic leaves than full sun plantings, that passion flower needs support structures to climb, that hops harvested slightly before full maturity are less bitter than fully mature cones. These observations join hundreds of others, creating a manuscript that's part gardening manual, part pharmacy reference, part community history. The knowledge feels precious in a way that's hard to articulate. You're preserving something that could easily be lost, the understanding of which plants help with rest, how to prepare them, how to combine them for different effects. This knowledge predates the convent, passed down through generations of women who learned it from their mothers and grandmothers, but it's also constantly evolving as new observations add to old wisdom. The night market operates by lamplight, creating a temporary world that exists only after sunset. You walk between stalls selling food, cloth, tools and, in one section that draws you like gravity, herbs and spices. The vendor you're seeking specializes in plants from distant regions, things that don't grow locally but arrive via trade routes that stretch across continents. Tonight you're here for something specific, dried chamomile from Egypt, which is said to be superior to the local variety. The flowers are smaller than the chamomile that grows in your own garden, more intensely scented with a sweeter apple fragrance. The vendor lets you smell a sample, crushing a few flowers between his fingers to release their full aroma. The scent is indeed remarkable, more concentrated than anything you've grown yourself. You buy a small quantity, it's expensive, imported goods always are, and also purchase some dried orange peel, which you've heard pairs well with chamomile for evening drinks. At home, you experiment with proportions, trying different ratios of chamomile to orange peel, steeping for various lengths of time, adjusting water temperature. The best combination turns out to be mostly chamomile with just a small amount of orange peel, steeped in water that's hot but not quite boiling, for approximately 7 minutes. The resulting tea tastes like apples and oranges had a child that was somehow more subtle than either parent. The chamomile's natural sweetness gets enhanced by the orange peel's faint bitterness, creating a flavour that's interesting enough to drink for pleasure, but calming enough to serve its purpose as sleep preparation. You drink this tea in the hour before bed, sitting near a window where you can watch the last activity in the street below gradually diminish as night deepens. The tea's warmth spreads through your chest and stomach, and the familiar relaxation begins. Shoulders dropping, breathing deepening, thoughts slowing their frantic pace. The Egyptian chamomile does seem more effective than your local variety, though you can't be certain whether this is objectively true or just the psychological effect of believing it should work better because it's exotic and expensive. Either way, the result is the same. Sleep comes more easily on nights when you drink this particular blend than on nights when you don't. You begin growing protective of your supply, rationing it carefully to make it last, using it only when you particularly need help sleeping rather than every single night. This transforms the tea from routine to treat, something special reserved for difficult nights when rest feels most elusive. The market vendor becomes familiar with your regular purchases, sometimes setting aside particularly good chamomile when his supplier brings a fresh shipment. You develop a relationship built around these small transactions. Your money for his plants, his knowledge of sources and quality for your appreciation and loyalty. He tells you stories about the origins of what he sells, describing Egyptian fields where chamomile grows in such profusion that the air smells of apples for miles, or mountain valleys where lavender blooms in sheets of purple that attract bees from every direction. You suspect some of these stories are exaggerated or entirely invented, but they add value beyond the physical product, connecting you to distant places and the people who grow these plants. The rituals of acquisition and preparation become as important as the effects of consumption. Walking to the night market, evaluating quality, negotiating price, carrying home your purchase, experimenting with preparation, finding the optimal combination. All of these steps contribute to the overall experience of using plants for rest. The darkness in your room has become complete now, the lamp burned down to nothing, the window showing only the faint difference between inside darkness and outside darkness. You've been lying here for some time, impossible to say how long without light to mark time's passage, letting the various influences of herbs and routine and deliberate quieting do their work. Your breathing has found a rhythm that requires no thought, deep and slow, each exhale lasting slightly longer than the inhale. The bed beneath you has stopped feeling like something separate from your body and started feeling like an extension of it, or perhaps you've extended into it, boundaries blurring in the way they do when consciousness begins its slide towards sleep. The scents that filled the room earlier, whatever plant you used tonight, though the specific identity is becoming hard to recall, have faded to the point where you notice them only occasionally when breathing catches them at a particular angle. They're background now, part of the atmosphere rather than a distinct sensation. Your mind has stopped producing coherent thoughts and switched to something more like images, disconnected fragments that drift past without requiring attention or response. A garden you worked in once, a river you crossed, hands preparing something in a bowl, though whose hands and what substance you can't quite determine. This state between waking and sleeping feels comfortable rather than frustrating, a place you could remain indefinitely without complaint. The usual urgency to actually achieve sleep, to make the transition happen, has dissolved. If sleep comes, fine. If it doesn't, also fine. The distinction between the two states matters less than it did when evening first arrived. The plants have done what they do, subtle or strong, quick or slow, each in its own way moving the body and mind towards stillness. The chamomile and lavender and valerian and lotus and ashwagandha and lemon balm, the poppy petals and rose scents and herb-infused oils, all the careful preparations and thoughtful rituals, the accumulated wisdom of generations who noticed what grew around them and learned to use it, these have created conditions favourable to rest. But the actual transition, the moment when awareness finally releases and unconsciousness claims you completely, this can't be forced or scheduled or guaranteed, regardless of how many herbs you use or how perfectly you follow ancient prescriptions. It happens when it happens, or it doesn't happen at all, and the plants can only increase the likelihood, make the waiting more comfortable, smooth the path but not control the destination. You're aware of this even in your current half state, aware that you're waiting for something that will arrive in its own time, or possibly not arrive at all, and that this uncertainty is fine, acceptable, not worth worrying about. The darkness holds you without pressure, the silence wraps around you without demanding anything, and somewhere in this gentle suspension between states, the final letting go occurs. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you're still here, still aware, still noticing the way breath moves in and out, the way the mattress presses up against your back, the way sounds from outside, distant, muffled, unidentifiable, reach you through whatever walls separate inside from outside. Maybe sleep is still approaching, or maybe it's already happened and what remains is some fragment of consciousness too small to notice its own sleeping. The plants can't answer this question. They've done their part, contributed what chemistry and scent and ritual can contribute, and now the rest is up to processes beyond their influence, beyond anyone's influence. The body will do what it does, the mind will follow or not follow, and eventually morning will arrive whether you've slept through the intervening hours or simply rested in darkness while time passed. The thought of morning already feels distant, irrelevant, something that might as well be years away for all the immediacy it carries. Right now there's only this: darkness, breath, the slowly diminishing awareness of being aware, the gentle dissolving of boundaries between you and the bed and the room and the night itself. Somewhere in all this dissolving, in this gradual releasing of the need to maintain consciousness, sleep finds its opening. Not with drama or announcement, not with a clear moment when you could say, "Now I'm falling asleep," but rather with a fading so gradual that there's no single point where wake becomes sleep, only a continuum that grows dimmer and dimmer until finally, without your noticing the transition, you're simply gone.